Welcome, I'm Neil Hanley, and on this slide it says I'm the ID Liver Chief Investigator, which I think is true, but actually increasingly feels less true. I'm going to give an early shout to Oliver, who's put today together as the Programme Manager, who has done a tremendous amount of work right the way through. And in part, I also say I am the Chief Investigator, but almost only in name. It's actually my day job now is Pro Vice Chancellor, Head of the College of Medical and Dental Sciences at the University of Birmingham. So if there are boos, I would understand it, that's fine. I started that job last September, but do spend my Fridays, as far as I can make it, here in Manchester, where I do my research. And so today is obviously a research day for me, so I have purposefully dressed down, and actually it gives me a chance to go back almost to the start of ID Liver. Well, it's not the start, but near the start of ID Liver, and of course I'm dressing down safe in the knowledge that Manish, who is here, who will meet you later, back at the Innovate UK interviews, where of course we were appropriately suited and booted, apart from Manish, who turned up in his jeans, trainers, and a trainer and a t-shirt, because he's the data guy. But obviously it went well because he, we got the award and here we are. And then also safe in the knowledge that Nigel, who's here from Solace, would whatever I couldn't compete. Well, I don't know where he is. He's gone. There he is. So dapper and sophisticated, all the things I will never be. So that's it's a research day for me. Good. So welcome everybody. I'm going to give you a few slides at the start as an introduction, and then I'll hand over to Oliver, who's going to compare the rest of the programme. We've got a lot on today, and I think, well, straight up, we've got a lot on because actually we've done a heck of a lot. I can say hand on heart, over 20 odd years of trying to do research, I think probably this programme is something I'm the most proud of. And it's simply because actually it wasn't where I started. I grew up as a laboratory scientist alongside my clinical work. So this was a whole new progression of work that's been built. In a sense, it's been a job of just pulling together great people, great talent. And you're going to hear from some of those people today. And it's really a sort of culmination of a decade, or more than a decade's work, that got us to this point of what is clinical translation, but actually going out into population health science, really. So I say that genuinely. It is one of the things I'm most proud of. So what is it? Well, these are Oliver's slides. So clearly, he's still frustrated. So most people in the room, if not everyone, will know that the motivation for us going into this space, which, as I say, was pretty much unknown for us, it's just the blindingly obvious recognition that what we have at the moment simply isn't fit for purpose. It's not good enough. So if you think about diagnostic pathways in liver medicine and liver health and diagnostics, we end up with pathways that it says easy to come up with designs of pathways, and many people have done it. But actually, when they're implemented, they're not implemented fairly. They don't get the people you want. They don't reach all the people you want to reach. And actually, there's very little evidence, if any, that they're any good. Cut-offs not validated across the population. So again, like my new job in Birmingham, Manchester, melting pot of the world, huge ethnic diversity. Of course, all of the things that we tend to reach for day to day and think that they work off the shelf, lots of them are untested in this breadth of population and ethnicity. And so, without reading through the slides directly, I think there is when we started this, there was a realization that if you look at about the 3 million people of Greater Manchester, about 1 million of them have aspects of liver dysfunction. And actually out there in primary care and community care, no one really knows who it is that's going to be at risk of progressive liver disease, liver fibrosis, liver scarring. No one therefore knows who it is that they should be referring in. And if they did, it would swamp every secondary, tertiary care service in the country, simply by volume. And so this whole area of clinical care pathways, well, doesn't work at the moment, but is something we need to try and get on and do something about. And that's what you're going to hear about this morning. So, again, 3/4 of liver fibrosis, late diagnosis. It rocks up in A&E, yellow, cirrhosis, end-stage liver failure, which carries an immensely high mortality. That first presentation, your risk of death is very high. And the car has crashed, the train has crashed. It's in no way is this early detection. And actually it's the sort of, maybe Varinder will talk about this later, it's actually a bit of a Cinderella topic. Everyone knows about the heart, the lungs, and an early detection of lung cancer, early detection of coronary heart disease. The liver just, well, I'll leave it for Varinder to explain his analogies later, but the liver is an organ that just hasn't had the attention, and yet it is an epidemic in terms of ill health. 1 million, as I go back to it, 1 million of the 3 million people in Greater Manchester have elements of liver dysfunction. The liver disease associated with obesity, type 2 diabetes, is going to be the leading cause of transplantation in the next few years, if not now. And again, Varinder will correct me if I've got that slightly wrong. But it is a tremendous, tremendous problem. So basically, I've already painted the picture of why we need to do something about it. There's yet more evidence. You look at liver disease deaths going up through the roof, when actually the good news is we are making inroads in other areas. And then when you look at the heat map, Public Health England data, if you look at the heat map for mortality stats, dark is bad. Basically, you can see all the major cities, but the northwest, putting to one side, I think Oliver must have twitched when he put the red circle because he's not quite got it over. He's going over into the Pennines there. But apart from that, Greater Manchester, it's a tremendous problem. So, how do we go about it? Well, you don't do this sort of stuff by yourself. That was the first message. And as I say, part of the fun was pulling together a tremendous consortium, and you're going to hear from them today. Not just academics in the university, not just clinicians in the NHS, but tremendous fun that's been had with our industry partners. Again, we tend to use the word industry generically, but of course that's tiny companies, it's medium-sized companies, it's big global companies. And what's been wonderful is the chemistry that's developed across those boundaries. I think we've all learned so much from each other. And basically pulling together all the different strands of information to try and come up with what we've termed multimodal diagnostics. It's not just to detect those with early stages of liver disease, but it's actually to try and prognosticate. Who is it amongst those people with very early stages of disease who is going to go on and get worse? And I think that is the real holy grail in healthcare. And so, welcome to Ian McKay, Tim Paget from Innovate UK. Innovate UK very kindly funded us through Wave 2, the Life Sciences Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund. It was pre-pandemic. It was a different world. We started out at the start of the pandemic. Again, tremendous achievement that we actually got going at such a tough time. And also, of course, we need to recognise we wouldn't have done this without the support of our global industrial partners and of those, Roche Diagnostics, Roche and GE Healthcare, been tremendous supporters. And again, their relationships I've really valued personally, and I know everyone feels the same. It's been great fun. So, I'm not going to dwell on this because others are going to tell you about the program, but it's getting out there into the heart of the community with a whole range of partners, basically coming up with algorithms, data science, new approaches to try and integrate data to come up with better diagnostics for liver disease detection at early stages. And Ben's not here yet. He'll be coming down later. Ben Bridgewater, Chief Exec, Health Innovation Manchester. But we've obviously, because we knew it's a Health Innovation Manchester kind of day, discover, develop, deploy as their strapline. So I'm going to stop there. There's today's agenda. I'm going to hand over to Oliver. I'm just going to say thank you very much for everyone coming. I think if we'd said at the start of this, however many years ago, that we would be stood here today and having brought together so many people from different parts of the country, from so many different sectors, with so much expertise, I don't think we'd have believed it, really. So it's been tremendous. And I'm looking forward to hearing all the presentations. I know there's great data underlying it, and I hope we, we will do it justice today. And I hope everyone has a lovely day. Thank you very much.
So thank you all for coming. It's really good to be here. I think, as Neil said, it's fantastic that we can all get together in the room together like this and celebrate some of the achievements of ID Liver. We did plan to have a launch event back in 2020. Obviously, for obvious reasons, that didn't happen. So, but I think this is a better way of actually doing it and showing off some of the stuff that we've actually achieved and meeting you all in person. These things online never really work in the same way, I think. But I won't speak much. I'll just hand over to Huw Purssell, who was a clinical fellow on the ID Liver project and can explain some of the work we've done around health inequalities. Thank you.
So my name is Huw Purssell. I'm one of the clinical research fellows that was attached at the Manchester side of the ID Liver project, now back in my registrar training post back in Stockport. So I'm just going to talk about some of the outputs we've had as part of the ID Liver project, particularly looking at health inequalities and what we can do about it. So I thought I'd start really talking about the scale of the problem in Manchester and what we've found in our cohort to date. So we started with by doing a search of GP practices through using Northwest eHealth's Farsight tool. We were able to scope through GP practice data looking for patients with risk factors for liver disease such as diabetes, harmful alcohol consumption, obesity. And in those practices that are signed up to Farsight, we found that 439,000 patients, there are 439,000 adult patients, of which over 55,000 had at least one risk factor for liver disease. That is likely to be an underestimate due to problems, lack of coding or patients not necessarily disclosing things around alcohol or things like that. As part of the project, we have assessed and seen just shy of 1,500 patients, and we've recruited 1,337 patients. Of those, just over 20% had evidence of clinically significant liver disease. What we have done is we've seen patients all over Manchester. We've seen patients at our acute hospital sites, so at Manchester Royal, Wythenshawe. We've seen patients in community hospitals like Withington. We ran a lot of clinics using the MFT research van, which meant that we could get out into the community to places that are close to patients' homes' addresses. And this meant that we could park up in GP practice car parks, churches, community centres. We ran the clinics for a week at Old Trafford, which was very cold because it was a January day, but there was no football on. But the feedback from patients was they much preferred coming to somewhere that was really close to home, where they didn't have to worry about paying for car parking, and rather than going to the acute sites. So, looking at sort of the impact of health and socioeconomic inequalities and how it impacted on our fibrosis detection, we were able to see where our patients came from, and Nigel and his team at Solace were able to map for us very nicely where our patients lived, where there were hotspots of risk factors. I'm going to show you some heat maps that they've created on some of my next slides. But what this meant that we could do is we could analyze patients at a ward level and see where fibrosis was at its highest. And we found that the detection rate of fibrosis was highest in wards which had a higher index of multiple deprivation. And as I say, this is some of the heat maps that Nigel and his team created for us. So I'm going to talk through what we did with a subset of GP practices. So we worked with 6 different practices where we proactively assessed patients with risk factors. so not patients that would not necessarily have come in to secondary care. And these practices were located in different areas of Manchester and Trafford, and they were in areas with differing levels of deprivation. So we've got practices 1, 2, and 3 on the maps there, which were located in Altrincham, Timperley, Sale, where areas of relative affluence. We've got practice number 4, which was, although cited in East Didsbury, which is, again, quite affluent, involved a catchment area which had some areas with increased deprivation. We had practices 5 and 6 in Wythenshawe and Hume, which had much higher rates of deprivation. And as you can see on the map on the right, that's mapping the index of multiple deprivation across Manchester and Trafford. And as I'm sure you'll agree with me, there was much higher detection rate of fibrosis around practices 4, 5, and 6, as shown on the map on the left. And when we broke this down at a practice level, we found that practices in areas of high deprivation, nearly 30% of patients had evidence of clinically significant liver disease, while in practices located in areas of low deprivation, that figure was less than 10%. So what can we do to try and improve the detection of liver disease? Early on in the project, we published a paper really just sort of trying to set out what we wanted to try and do. And so the current model is one where patients are picked up as having abnormal liver tests, which doesn't necessarily correlate with having clinically significant disease. A lot of patients may never develop abnormal liver tests and therefore are missed. And as the years go on, very few patients are picked up, and they may, as Neil mentioned at the start, they end up presenting to hospital with a costly admission with decompensated liver disease, and that carries with it a very high mortality. What we envisaged was a proactive assessment where we could see patients with obesity, harmful alcohol consumption, diabetes. We could use new tools such as machine learning to risk stratify them and see them in our community liver assessment clinics, where we can provide patients with tailored, individualized lifestyle advice to slow or reverse liver damage. And this would result in a much better 5-year survival. So I mentioned machine learning. I'm not going to talk too much about this because Mani's going to talk about it afterwards and is going to be able to explain it much, much better than me. But I thought I'd probably talk about it a little bit from the clinical side of things. So we had several phases of our machine learning work. The initial phase was really to prove concept that it was possible and that algorithms could be developed. So the team in Nottingham used their Scarred Liver Project data to create some algorithms and prove that the machine learning work could do this. And they found that this was going to be best applied in a community setting to risk stratify patients at that point as to patients needing fibrosis assessment or patients that could be followed up in community. We then moved on to our second phase, where we combined data from Nottingham as well as Manchester's ID liver data to create an algorithm that predicted the risk of fibrosis based on FibroScan. By combining the data sets, it added strength and validity and applicability to the algorithms. And as you can see from the ROC curve on the left, that we compared the algorithm against the traditional risk stratification scores that are used in primary care, and the machine learning algorithm was significantly better than the traditional scores such as FIB4 and Athwal fibrosis score. We internally validated this in a subset of Manchester patients, really to compare to look at how it would work against the FIB4 score, which is what we use locally. So if we were to use the FIB4 score, over 30% of patients would go on to need further investigations, often completely unnecessarily. If we used our machine learning algorithms, only 15% of patients would need further investigations, and there was absolutely no impact on the false negative rate. So finally, I'm going to talk a little bit about the multimorbidity side of liver disease. We know, and it's well documented, that liver disease is associated with significant cardiovascular disease, metabolic syndrome. However, we noticed very early on in the project that a lot of our patients were coming to us with ultrasound findings of fatty liver or abnormal liver function tests, and these were being found incidentally as part of investigations for other GI-related conditions, particularly conditions around such as irritable bowel syndrome. And this led us on to publish a review article looking at the shared pathophysiological pathways between non-alcoholic fatty liver disease and irritable bowel syndrome. So we found that there was a lot of shared pathways, not only dietary, but immunological pathways and gut microbiota. So really linking in with a gut, brain, liver axis. And there have been several studies which had shown an increased incidence of irritable bowel syndrome in non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, but we did our own prospective study in a small cohort of patients with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And we found that nearly 30% of patients met the Rome-4 criteria for irritable bowel syndrome. And these patients had a significant symptom burden at a sort of level that we'd expect in our tertiary irritable bowel clinics. And so I think it's something that as clinicians we certainly need to think about when we see our patients, that although we're seeing them from a liver perspective, they may well have other symptoms which need to be addressed or referred onwards. So those are just some of the outputs that we've had as part of the ID Liver project. I know there's more to come. We've got a couple of papers in the pipeline and a presentation at the forthcoming EASL conference. But I'd just like to say thank you to the rest of the team, particularly to Lucy, who's here from Nottingham, who has also contributed massively from the Nottingham side. Thank you.
Thanks, Huw. That was really interesting. I think we've got time for a couple of questions if anybody in the audience wants to ask, or we can come back later.
It's really interesting. I was just wondering, when you're looking at the declination in deaths and fibrosis, did you look at any sort of subgroups within that, and what's the correlation with fibrosis?
Absolutely. So as part of the paper, there's a paper that we're working up. We've looked at the different subdomains of the index of multiple deprivation, and fibrosis still correlates to almost all subdomains, short of sort of housing, which I think is probably going to be biased because we're an urban population. But there was, all the different subdomains, whether that even things like crime, were all linked with an increased prevalence of fibrosis.
Thank you. We've got a microphone, sorry.
Were you able to sort of distinguish between alcoholic and non-alcoholic sort of fatty liver in that?
Yes, I think there's been a huge change in sort of definitions in the last year, which I think we're probably going to have to do a fair bit of work to sort of redefine a lot of patients. So when we were seeing them, we're obviously going through all the risk factors, making some clinical judgments as to what is likely to be the main risk factors. I think the strength of this project is that it's based on real-world data. So where patients can have metabolic risk factors for non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, as well as drinking too much alcohol. And so what we have is we have this real-world data set which rather than sort of very sort of segmented populations.
Hiya, Vanessa Hebditch here, British Liver Trust. Hi, very great to see this data. I'm particularly interested because we've just secured the first ever parliamentary debate on liver disease and health inequalities, which is taking place on 25th of April. So I'm wondering, we're in the process at the moment of briefing MPs to speak at that debate, and I'm wondering whether there's any snippets of the data that we could use. So maybe I could catch up with you afterwards.
Yeah, we'll catch up afterwards.
Yeah.
I'm sure we can provide some data.
Thank you. What last question from Nigel?
Thank you so much for the presentation. And for me, I think, like I've said, just the global data, let's say, on a high level. It would be very interesting to see, having talked about the prevention and also other comorbidities outside that alcohol risks, and within the BME community where we have multiple issues. So it would be very interesting to find some segregated data as per ethnicity to see how we can actually tailor these conversations when we go in the community.
Absolutely. I think that's a key point, and in terms of sort of comorbidities, we've got all that data for patients, but I think getting the message out to all groups, I think, is absolutely key.
Okay, thank you. I think in the interest of time, we'll move on to the next speaker now. I think, but Huw's around at the break and during lunch as well. That leads on nicely to Manish Patel, who's CEO of JIVA, and some of the work, he'll explain some of the work we've been doing around developing a risk prediction tool and using that clinical data that Huw mentioned. Thanks, Manny.
Yeah, and thanks for the kind invitation today. So my name is Manny. True to form, I'm wearing trainers, albeit they're better trainers than the ones I wore the day we went to London for that interview. And it's hilarious because I'll never forget Neil's face when he looked down. His face was true disappointment, which it was really funny because at the time he had a missing tooth, and that took up all of the conversation in the interview anyway. No one actually even noticed I was in casual clothes. So anyway, thanks for the intro. I think it's fair to say it's been an eventful 3 years, and what I wanted to do today was firstly summarise who we are, what we do. From a high level, talk a little bit about the project and what we did, but I really wanted to focus on the outcomes, and I'm not just talking about the scientific and technological outcomes. I'm talking about the commercial outcomes as well for JIVA as an SME in this project. So first of all, on who we are. So I'll go through the people on the JIVA side. Obviously, on the other side there was Lucy, Huw, and other Neil Guha involved in the project. But within JIVA, the key people were Mohammed, who we actually hired off the back of getting the liver project in the first place. He's probably one of the most talented data scientists I know currently. Super nice guy, was able to really break things down. Remember, he didn't have any clinical experience before this point either, and it was a real experiment for us to actually get a data scientist, AI engineer who didn't have that experience to actually try to understand what it was all about and then actually do something useful. Richard Hammersley was our CTO. He's dead to me now because he's left the company, but he was also instrumental in building the things that we needed to build on the back end and coordinating the project from a technical perspective. Sarah is also a co-founder of JIVA. She's our COO. She did everything from doing the Innovate UK timesheety type stuff all the way through to coordinating project management through the meetings and things like this. And I was just in the background, basically just watching everyone do stuff and enjoying the show. So what do we do? So I've had 23 years of experience in machine learning AI across a range of different industries. I actually started my work in cancer research. Very quickly found I can't afford a house in London as an academic, so ended up working for banks and hedge funds in the algorithmic trading space. And so I have quite a varied application kind of sort of experience in AI and machine learning. And the one thing I've found that has become very sort of obvious over the last few years is that to find AI engineers or data scientists who know how to code, who know how to break things down, like Mohammed can, is very, very difficult. It's a very difficult skill set to find. Even if you do find them, it's really hard to get them into your company, generally because they're really expensive. Even if you can afford them, it takes a long time to build a solution. I'll come back to time savings in a sec. And then there is the cost of deploying an AI solution that people generally don't understand is there. People generally tend to focus in on the R&D bit of the AI rather than the deployment bit of the AI. So that's what JIVA actually is all about. We want to create, test, validate, deploy AIs without having to write a single line of code. And it was a massive experiment for us right at the beginning when we joined the ID Liver project, because we were a really small company at the time. And what we wanted to do is build this big platform where we could achieve this dream of someone, for example, like Lucy, to come along, use the platform, and create a model. In the end, that didn't actually happen, but that's what we were working towards. So, quick snippets about how we do things and what we do. So, effectively, we try to take the coding logical elements out of the data science process. What we're trying to say is, you guys are the experts in whatever area you're in. We are the data science and AI experts, and somewhere in the middle we meet and create a solution. And on our platform, you essentially describe what you want to do, and the platform takes you through step by step in creating that solution with you. So all along the way, you are directing the development of the application, but we are telling you the kind of things that you need to be doing to build your AI. And just some quick observations over the last couple of years. We've seen some companies, some of our clients, save up to 80% of costs in building their AI solution, and saving up to 90% of time in building the solution. And just on that point, Mohammed spent 9 months pretty much full time on creating our first model, when we were going through the paces of understanding it, what it was all about, doing the imputation, doing the experimentation and that kind of stuff. That was 9 months full time of his time to build our first model. We can actually build that model from the original data on our platform in 7 seconds. So that's how fast we can now do it. So that's the kind of thing I'm talking about, is the learning that we got from this project was just immense, because as you were saying, this was real world data. It wasn't sort of play data. It had gaps in it. It was a complex piece of information. How do you get an AI to understand how to break that down and actually take someone through the journey of creating a solution? So it was immensely useful to us. Just very quick, as you can see here, all the formatting is buggered up, but it says me right for using Google for creating the slides. But anyway, as Huw was saying, there were 2 data sets. There was the Nottingham data set initially, in which we created a set of models, and that was us getting to grips with things. That itself was a really great learning journey, because it was the first time we'd actually engaged with at least one NHS trust and clinicians to understand what we were talking about. We had actually done a prostate cancer diagnostic before that, but that was off the back of data that had already existed, and expertise we already had in the team. So this was entirely new for us. And then the MFD data sort of trickling in during COVID, and that fed into the second set of models. And that's just the first part. Obviously, the R&D, as I was saying, everyone tends to focus on the R&D of the AI bit. Actually, there's a whole segment of development you have to think about when if you ever want to commercialize this thing. How do you deploy the solution so that it's actually usable in the clinical space? And people generally forget about that step. So I think very cleverly, Neil had put together a set of work packages where Roche was involved with a Navify product, in which we could actually couch the model and communicate with a front end that was, on the one side, garnering information from clinicians. So I think Huw was plugging information in on the front end on Navify. That would make its way to the algorithm sitting somewhere in AWS. That would make the prediction, and then plug in the prediction afterwards. So that delivery mechanism was a very useful exercise to go through, because we then understood what the complexity of putting something like that together. I'm not going to go through the entire kind of model building that we did, but that is actually as complex as it got in the end. That is the machine learning blueprint that we currently have under the hood for ID liver. It basically describes how it takes data from source, cleans it, looks for gaps, imputes gaps. So imputes means, if there's a gap in your data, it looks at the statistical distribution of all the data and tries to figure out what that missing data might be. And then at the bottom right there is what we have what we call a super learner or an AutoML. And what that does is it tests lots and lots of different types of algos and then tunes the hyperparameters for each one. And therefore, in parallel, it can actually optimize over thousands of different flavors of models and then come up with the ones that actually work best. And in the end, the model that, actually currently right now, as of last week, the model that Mohammed currently has running is a super learner that has 4 or 5 underlying machine learning models that all come together in a voting system to create a diagnostic. So I didn't want to go through too much of the detail here. If there's questions around the actual specifics around the model, that would be I'd be delighted to answer those questions. But I just wanted to show that actually, given the complexity of the data, just to give you an idea, right? The first time I saw the Nottingham data, I was really surprised. It was kind of like I was scrolling across the Excel spreadsheet thinking, when is this going to end? It's a really wide spreadsheet of data, lots and lots of different modalities on the columns, and not that many patients. And so the very first thing when we were going through that first pass with Mo and Richard was kind of thinking, there's a lot of degrees of freedom here. Is there even a signal to be had? And that's, doing that initial analysis of the Nottingham data actually showed that actually there was a signal. It's just that you had to cut out all the noise from the columns that didn't actually make any sense for the algo, and that was an interesting learning process as well. I've actually ended up spending lots of minutes on the first few slides, and this is what I actually wanted to focus on. So remember, we were a fledgling company right at the beginning, right? We'd done a prostate diagnostic. We had a vision for this big AI platform, and we didn't really know where to go from there had we not had the ID liver project one before we had our first funding round. I think that's really important. We were really lucky to have Manchester University, Roche, GE, and all the other industry partners involved in this particular project. It gave us a level of credibility that was hard to convey had it not been the case, right? And it was thanks to that credibility we won 4 other Innovate UK projects in other disease areas and actually non-healthcare areas as well. We started getting momentum on client traction thanks to that. A lot of the development that we did in the ID liver project for that particular model that I showed you before actually made its way into the platform as generic components. Those generic components were then used for other use cases, in fact completely outside of healthcare kind of use cases, which is really interesting to see. And so it was the seed that gave us this massive tree of development that we ended up having 3 years down the line. Of course, the big thing for us was that at the time was our investment round in 2021. We procured £1.3 million and a subsequent £2 million afterwards. And a lot of that was to do with the fact that we had the ID liver project running. Finally, just a quick one on a spin out. So we're an AI platform. Our business model is B2B SaaS. What we've increasingly found is that we're seeing very specific use cases like the liver project, like the prostate project that we had before, and various others that are super interesting, high human impact, things that we can really help on. But ourselves, we don't want to be a healthcare company, we want to be a core AI company. And so how do we make that work? Well, we kind of figured out that we can create spin-out companies, and in those spin-out companies, we can containerize the IP and give them all they need to thrive commercially. And so we're now in the process of spinning out a company, and Evelina, I saw her somewhere here, has been very diligent in putting the information and getting all the plates spinning in getting that going. So that's all I wanted to cover today. If there are any questions, I'd be delighted to answer. I think I have a few minutes left. I just want to take the opportunity to say thank you to Neil and the entire gang. It has really been an inspirational journey, and I can't believe it's already over, but we are kind of continuing to work together, and I hope we continue to do that for many years to come. Thank you.
Thanks, Manny. I remember seeing you before the interview in London, and I thought it was just part of the uniform. So,
the startup uniform.
Yeah, I would have been disappointed if it wasn't the case. Do you have any questions for Manny in the audience? No? Okay, well, you'll be around for the day.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, so I'd like to introduce our next speaker, who's Gabriel Rogers from the Manchester Centre for Health Economics, and we'll talk about what we're doing from a health economics perspective. Thanks, Gabriel.
Thanks, Oliver. Yeah, I'm Gabriel, and I don't have any particular comments about my footwear. I am a health economist working at the University of Manchester, and I've been overambitious in the amount of stuff I'm going to try and get through, so let's get going. So one thing that you'll quickly learn if you encounter health economists is we like drawing pictures of things to try and get an understanding of the problems with which we're dealing. So early in my involvement with this project, I started drawing these pictures, which started thinking about a reservoir of cases out there that we might want to find. These are the people that hepatologists want in their clinic that have clinically significant liver disease, which for the purposes of this project, we're defining on the basis of a liver stiffness score of over 8 kilopascals on like a FibroScan. So these are the people we want to try and find. So the conventional route of finding them is that GPs will refer people into the system, and there'll be a mixture of the true positive cases, the ones that the hepatologists do want to see in their clinic, and inevitably a large number of people who can be seen and discharged back to the GP with some simple advice. And that's how the conventional pathway is going to work. As part of ID Liver, as Huw's spoken about, the project of going out into the community and trying to identify a broader section of people, including these people here, the true positives who we wouldn't find because they're not going to come through the traditional GP referral route. That becomes possible when you proactively go out and look for them, as Huw and others proved in this project. But we also saw that you get a fair amount of false positives with that process. So a reasonable proportion of the people you go and find can be reassured and discharged. So the question arises, how can we maximize the amount of time that the hepatologists spend on people who can benefit most from their care? And this is where what Manny was talking about and Huw a little bit earlier, the kind of prediction model can fit into the equation. So if we stick a risk prediction model into our referral pathway, then we're going to cut down all these what were false positives, and we're going to turn them into true negatives because we don't have to see them in secondary care anymore. There will still be some false positives because no prediction model is perfect, and because no prediction model is perfect, we're introducing a proportion of false negatives to our case. If we saw everyone, we would have none of those, but because we've narrowed down the people we're looking at, we are going to lose some people along the way. And the question arises from a health economist's point of view, what's the trade-off there? On the one hand, we've got rid of these people who were consuming resources at secondary care without any particular benefit to them. And on the other hand, we've introduced some people who would have benefited if we'd seen everyone, and we've missed some of them now because we're concentrating on a smaller group. And it turns out that health economic modelling of the type I do is a decent way of answering that kind of question, which I'll talk about. I'll say that in what I'm doing today, I'm exclusively focusing on what happens when you introduce this risk prediction model into the conventional referral routes. You can, of course, as a matter of principle, put it into the innovative way of proactively finding people, and we've done some analysis on that. I just don't have time to talk about it today. So, how do we capture that value? We need to know, what do you lose from a true negative in terms of resource? What do you lose from a false negative in terms of health to the person and the missed opportunity to diagnose them? So we make a simplified decision model which looks like this and sets out an abstracted version of a liver disease pathway with, as we move from left to right, more significant liver disease going on. And at the bottom here, there are HCC, hepatocellular carcinoma, liver cancer that arises and is more likely to arise as liver disease gets more significant. So the pink arrows within this diagram indicate the transitions between states that we think, if you are known to a hepatology service, that hepatology service might be able to affect in terms of slowing or reversing progression of liver disease. And we've some evidence on how you can intervene with people, particularly lifestyle interventions on people with lifestyle-related liver disease, which is going to help to have different, smaller probabilities of people moving through the progression of disease. And the other thing we can do is, once people are in the system and known, then if they come in with compensated cirrhosis, or if they develop cirrhosis during that period, we can offer them surveillance for liver cancer, which means that if and when they develop liver cancer, then we've got a chance of catching them in these earlier stages where they have better prognosis. So these pink arrows represent the things that hepatologists and hepatology departments do which affect the prognosis of liver disease, which is why you would want to detect people early. So you take a model like that, you feed some evidence into it, which I'm not going to talk through, and what you get out the back end is something like this. This is our a provisional model of what an expected lifetime looks like for someone you could notionally diagnose at a given point. This is our false negatives. This is what happens if we don't find the person. And what you see is that the people progressed through stages of liver disease, and these darker orange colours reflect compensated cirrhosis, decompensated cirrhosis, which is, as has been pointed out, is an expensive and expensive state with horrible prognosis, and then some people in the thin red line at the top getting liver cancer. So what happens if we know about those people and we use that evidence about how the pink arrows change? Then the picture begins to look something like this. The most obvious thing you see is that the green area at the bottom gets bigger. That is, we predict that more people achieve regression of their fibrosis, such that they're no longer in a state of significant fibrosis. And if you look very carefully, you can see that the orangey states up the top are getting a little bit narrower, because we've also delayed progression of disease through some forms of effective intervention. And overall, the people are living a bit longer. So there's more area under this curve, because we've identified disease and we predict that the upshot of that is that those simple interventions live to somewhat longer lifespans. And that all boils down into a bunch of numbers that comes out of the back end of that bit of modelling. So without going through all of them, you'll see that life years are longer if you find people, the true positives versus the false negatives. And quality-adjusted life years, which is a measure that health economists like to use to measure not only length of life, but the quality of life when you're in it. We get quality of life, quality gains from finding people. It also costs a little bit more money. There's a pros and cons to finding people in terms of the lifetime costs. On the one hand, you do prevent some of those long-term expensive decompensation events that we've heard about. On the other hand, you're following up people more frequently and you're giving them scans and tests as you go. And this model suggests that on balance, you end up spending a bit more money on someone you identify than on someone you don't over their lifetime. But actually, that difference is relatively small. It's like £1,000 to £1,500. And if you really are getting a life year or more out of that, then conventionally we'd say that's spectacular value for money that we've managed to buy for the system. So, when we've got all those numbers, everything else we do with them is just a sum. We know what a true positive looks like. We know what a false negative looks like. Everything else is just a weighted average of those according to what you could do up front to identify those people. And so we build decision trees that maybe look something like this, where we distinguish between, so we get the probability of being in one of those states from the ID liver data that the clinicians have recorded, and then the diagnostic accuracy of a test will tell you your probability of ending up in one of these boxes according to whether you are or aren't found by whatever test you apply. And then there are outcomes that are associated with that. So we've got QALYs and we've got costs, and importantly, the costs of secondary care investigation are part of that, and that's where we would want to avoid false positive diagnoses. That's the downside of identifying too many people, is that the system gets swamped. So, in theory, I can plot any test you can imagine in terms of its cost effectiveness with only 3 pieces of information here, having built that model. I only need to know its cost, I need to know its sensitivity and its specificity. I'm going to ignore its cost for now because I just want to talk theoretically. So here is the cost effectiveness of any test you can imagine in this space, with lighter colours representing greater cost effectiveness. And what you can see immediately from this is that there is more variability from top to bottom than there is from left to right. That means that this problem is more influenced by the sensitivity of a test than the specificity of the test. It's really important that we catch people. And actually the downside of false positive referrals is the money to the system, and that makes a difference. You can see the gradient changing slightly on left to right, but what's really driving it is the sensitivity, the true positive pickup rate. And then you can overlay on top of that, this is the ROC curve that it's related to the one that Huw showed earlier, where we look at the machine learning model that's been developed and see how it does. And again, a perfect test would be right up in this top left corner, where it would identify everyone it needs to and not refer a single person that doesn't need to be referred. And so we want to move up towards that, and our ROC curve tells us something about how close we get. At a cutoff of 0.4, which has been used in the analysis mostly so far, then you end up at a certain point on the graph. But of course, you could use any threshold that you like. And one of the things we've looked at is how you square that circle. Finally, just showing you on this bit, you can also plot, like this is the diagnostic accuracy of FIB4 in the data set here. This is the holdout data set. That means it's slightly different from the numbers Huw presented earlier, and I apologise for that, and it has some slightly different implications, but it's the same principles at play. Okay, so specifically some results. This is a bunch of health economist cost effectiveness stuff, which I'm not going to go through. It's really easy if you just draw a picture of it, though. And it looks like that. Health economists like to plot QALYs on a horizontal axis, costs on a vertical axis. The greatest myth about health economists is that what we're trying to do is to go as far down the graph as we can. The truth of the matter is we're trying to go as far right on the graph as we can. We want to get as much health in the system as we can, subject to the constraint of the money we spend, and we operationalize that constraint by saying if the line between any 2 points is steeper than what's going on in the background, these dotted lines in the background, then it's probably wouldn't be considered good value for money. So we want to go as far right as we can without going bust with a line that goes above that gradient. So what this shows is actually the cheapest thing we can do is to have Fib4 in the system, because Fib4, if it's good for nothing else, it's good at getting rid of people. Certainly at that threshold and in that data set, it's cutting people out of the system. But the question is it cutting the right people out of the system? Are we missing people in secondary care we would want to see? And actually, this analysis suggests yes, it is, because if we adopt the machine learning model that's been developed here with its threshold of 0.4, then you get more qualies in the system, you get more health, and it's at good value. We're at a shallower gradient than our underlying threshold here. And so we've got more health at a decent cost. And then the most expensive thing you can do is just see everyone. And that would give you the most health, because you'd never miss anyone if you just saw everyone. But the amount of resource that takes out of the system is properly predicted to be more than we can afford, because we get that sharper, steeper gradient along the way. So this result suggests that the new machine learning model adds enough value to the system without getting past the point of diminishing returns, which is what you get with just seeing everyone. I'm going to whip through. It turns out if you look to try and find the optimal threshold from a cost effectiveness point of view, it's about 0.4. This shows that it's pretty much bang on the most health you could get out of the system. Interestingly, Fib4, if you set the threshold rather lower, you'd get more health. And that's just showing that in a picture. I haven't talked about cost at all. So everything I've done so far assumes that the new machine learning model is free. And we know in practice it isn't. It's going to come with a license fee from the developer. It needs infrastructure to work it. We tried to do some work around costing that. It turns out that's really hard to do. And we're going to carry on working on it. But the important thing here is that we can at least say that if it ends up costing the system less than about £50 per person who comes through, then we're still in credit. We're still going to be at in the zone of that graph we want to be in. We've got a to-do list. Everything I've shown you so far, I failed to tell you, is about NAFLD. We've got a parallel version of the model that works in alcohol that's 90% finished that we can add on. And also, as we go forward, we want to do a better job of understanding the real resource use within the pathway and remove some of our assumptions and replace them with data. But that is what I've managed to do so far.
Thank you, Gabriel. That was really interesting. Time for one very quick question here, if anybody in the audience would like to ask.
Thanks, Gabriel. I love the pictures as well, because that helped me get to grips with a lot of information quickly. I'm a GP by profession and involved in community health checks, which we'll talk about later, but I'm really interested in, actually, when you look at the cost modelling, the recognition of the overlay with the multimorbidity and the benefits realisation that would come from that when we look at the impact on those multimorbid conditions.
Yeah, that's really complicated, isn't it? So a couple of things immediately to say about that. One thing that I think I've got here in my future work, exploring competing causes of mortality. So one dumb thing that the model does at the moment is it assumes that as far as non-liver mortality is concerned, anyone who's in this population has the same risk of death as a member of the general population. and that is almost certainly untrue. It captures the excess liver mortality, but it's clearly the case that people who are in this population are likely to be comorbid and likely to have increased competing causes of mortality. So that's one thing we'd like to capture better. The other thing is that, especially when it comes to NAFLD and obesity-related disease, one of the things that Varinder and others talked about when we first spoke about this is the extent to which a diagnosis of liver disease gives someone an additional advocate within the system. It's not like a diagnosis of liver disease in someone who's experiencing significant obesity makes them eligible for a diet or exercise intervention that they weren't previously eligible for, or makes them eligible for bariatric surgery that they weren't previously eligible for. But it does give them another impetus, it gives them another advocate within the system that could, you hope, contribute to their overall outcomes being better. That is the kind of complexity that those of us who like to simplify problems down to colourful boxes frequently struggle with, but it's certainly something we talked about.
Thank you.
Okay.
Our next speakers are Karen and Elliot from the University of Manchester, and we'll talk about some of the work we've done to translate the biomarker discovery. Is Elliot around?
Yes.
Okay.
Hi, thank you. So what I thought I'd do is just give a bit of a broad overview of how we got into this project, and then a little bit of where we're moving, where we're taking this project as follow on from ID Liver. And Elliot's going to show you some of the real data that we've been using as biomarkers as part of ID Liver. So Neil's already given you an overview of the scale of the problem in terms of liver disease, particularly in the northwest. But from a lab perspective, we're really interested in the idea of scarring or fibrosis. We know that it's part of high morbidity and mortality. And the reason for this is it's just a common pathway in most chronic diseases. And of course, there's poor diagnosis, and there really aren't any antifibrotic therapies out there. So we're really at the discovery end, and we're interested in the cells that make the scar, and these are like an effector cell type that becomes activated in response to the immune inflammatory response. And effector cells in the liver tend to be called hepatic stellate cells. They become activated, and they just deposit tissue-damaging scar components, which causes fibrosis. And what happens in the liver is this whole environment changes, so all of the cells change, and of course when fibrotic tissue becomes so great, the organ stops function, the liver stops function. So in the lab, I'm going to condense about 20 years' work into 2 slides. And cut a very, very long story short, when I was doing my PhD and 150 years ago when Neil was doing his PhD.
Just remember you had a great supervisor.
I became interested in this protein, this transcription factor called SOX9. And we were working in the area of human development then. And really, in a nutshell, what SOX9 does, we know this from a very well-described model of chondrogenesis or bone formation, is that it regulates a whole host, a whole pile of collagen and matrix proteins. That's what it does. It switches on matrix. And we know this from some really old work on Camper-Milk dysplasia. So mutations in SOX9 cause the syndrome Camper-Milk dysplasia, which one of the primary characteristics is shortening of the long bones, so impaired bone formation. So we know that SOX9 regulates matrix. Cut forward a few more years, nobody was really looking at SOX9 in terms of a disease scenario. And we started to notice that SOX9 became ectopically expressed. It was there where it shouldn't be during liver disease. And it didn't take us too long to think, well, if SOX9 is present in the liver and there's a whole load of matrix or scar produced, maybe SOX9 is doing the same thing. So we start to look at SOX9 in effector cells, the cells that become activated during fibrosis. We saw that SOX9 was switched on in these cells where it ectopically regulated matrix proteins, in particular collagen type 1. We were able to model this in animal models of disease, so taking the in vitro discovery through to in vivo models, and we could show that SOX9 was present in those models, in those animal models of fibrosis. We could then knock it out and show that if we took away SOX9, the fibrosis improved, and also those effector cells, those hepatic stellate cells, became very much reduced. So it suggested to us that SOX9 was really, really important in driving that fibrotic response in the liver. Of course, we always look to translate our work, and this was where Varinder came to the lab and started to work on this area. I should say that this is a build as well, that we were able to bring in the University of Nottingham and Neil Guer. So this is work that spans probably 10 years ago when we all started to work together, that has really been a build for ID liver. And so we wanted to know how important SOX9 was in human disease, so we took liver biopsies. We were interested in, could it diagnose liver fibrosis, but also could it predict who might get worse fibrosis. And at this point we were working on a hepatitis C cohort where people used to get 2 biopsies. So we looked in an early biopsy, so Ishak stage 2 for hepatologists out there, and we only took progressors when they progressed at least 2 stages of the disease, and the non-progressors didn't progress at all. And what we showed, if you just look at this bar here, you can see that there is a sequential increase, step up with SOX9 as stage of disease increases. But what was really important to us, or what really interesting to us, was that in those early biopsy samples, the non-progressors didn't change, but in the progressor population, there was always double the amount of SOX9 in that initial biopsy. So it predicted who was going to get worse. Now, what's interesting about this for me is that we subsequently started to investigate SOX9 a little bit more, and what we now know is that really the amount of SOX9 tends to tell us that there is this change in environment. So we're already seeing cell state changes, not just in the scar, but in some of the normal liver, so a disease-associated hepatocytes and cholangiocytes. And that's really been a major part of our work in the lab. Nobody wants to look in biopsy, everybody wants biomarkers. We know SOX9 regulates matrix proteins, so we took a genomic approach to identify downstream targets of SOX9, and we came up with an enormous panel of extracellular matrix proteins. And these are, we were able to publish that and show that a number of them could detect progression of liver disease. And these are some of the markers that we have taken forward into the ID liver study, and I think Elliot will show you some of that data in a little while. But just to add to this, the ID liver project's really been able to help us gain more information about what's happening in liver disease. So what we've been able to do is to take these markers that we've identified and place them onto this new technique called spatial transcriptomics, which allows us to identify spatially where the changes, where those cell state changes are happening around the scar and also in the immune system. And then we can really check and see whether those are secreted biomarkers that we can also measure in patient serum. And so this is just a little schematic of the sort of work that we've been doing. So we can do a whole single cell approach on an experimental cohort and then apply that to our liver biopsies that we have from ID liver and then measure in serum and collect all of that data. And you end up with something that looks really beautiful like this, where we can start to explore what's happening within the scar, in the immune system, and also all of those cell state changes that occur in response to scarring. And that's really important because not only are these aspects diagnostic, but if they're really important, and we think SOX9 is a key driver, then clearly they're going to be targets for therapeutics. And so this has been really important to understand what's happening, not just in the scar, but in the normal tissue, so that we can start to target for new antifibrotics and understand how cell states are changing in response to the disease. And I hope that what we can do is target patients at specific stages of disease, because we might already have some of those therapeutics available, but we're not using them at the right stage of disease. So really understanding the progression of the disease and all the cells that are changing is important. So we work in this triad of in vitro, so cells, mouse, in vivo, and human. And I think ID liver's really helped us to not just understand the basic science underpinning liver fibrosis, but also allow us to input into disease modelling and help us to understand what the best diagnostics might be. And I should say that in terms of the cost models that have just been presented, the markers that Elliot's going to tell you about next, none of those have been inputted into the new costing model to train those algorithms. So we hope that that will make an impact on the cost models as well. So Elliot, I'll hand over to you.
Yeah, so I was going to talk you through one of the in vivo models and how we've sort of interrogated this data through the lens of ID liver to kind of come up with biomarkers. So this was a PhD project led by Jess quite a few years ago, I think back in 2016. And she was focused on this mouse called the clock delta 19 mutant mouse. And essentially this mouse has a disrupted circadian rhythm, and so as we know, people with disrupted circadian rhythm like night shift workers have increased susceptibility to lots of diseases. And the same is true of this clock delta 19 mutant mouse, so you can see it on the right here. So it sort of spontaneously develops a phenotype of obesity, susceptible to diabetes as well. So this is a model that's fairly similar to human MASLD. And one of the interesting things about these mice is that at baseline, what you can see here is this is collagen 1, so this is one of the components of the scar. And these mice are starting to upregulate collagen in response to this obesity and susceptibility to diabetes. But interestingly, they don't have an increased expression of alpha-SMAR, which is like the classic activation marker. So what this tells us is these mice at this baseline are at a very early stage of liver fibrosis, and so could be a good source to look for biomarkers of early liver disease. So as Karen introduced, the primary mediators of scarring in the liver are the hepatic stellate cells. So we turned our attention to these hepatic stellate cells in these clock delta 19 mutant mice. And what you can do, you can sort of like watch them activate over time, and you can see in the wild type mice, by day 5, there's no expression of these activation markers. But in these clock delta 19 mutant mice, you do start to see collagen 1 and alpha-SMAR emerge. So it's sort of like reinforcing the sense that in this mutant mouse, you're getting earlier activation of these cells. And so the question became, what is it about these cells that's giving them this property? So what we then went on to do is microarray analysis, which lets us compare thousands of different genes between the knockout and the clock delta 19 mutant mouse and the wild type. And essentially, you come out with a bunch of different genes, and what we can do is look at the functional annotation of those genes. And what we can see is that in these mutant mice, lots of these cells have genes that are related to things like extracellular matrix organization, which is going to be very important for this score. So then essentially what we've done is taken the list of genes that are dysregulated by these mice. We can then further interrogate the function of these genes and where they are. So we wanted to focus on genes that were annotated to be in the extracellular space because we're going to be looking at blood biomarkers, so we want to look at things that are secreted. We also focus on kits that were already commercially available as well. And then we were able to, using the ID liver cohort, assess the levels of these biomarkers in patient serum. So this is just one example down here of a serum marker called AOC3. And so we stratify the patients by their FibroScan score, so 8, 15, and 15. And you can see you start to get significant discrimination between stiffnesses and also based on FIB4 score. And so we're able to pull all this together into a paper in Cells, and we're also able to present it at EASL last year. And yeah, so this paradigm of running through this pipeline here, we've done a lot of different data sets, and I'm not actually allowed to tell you what these markers are, but you can see we essentially looked at over 20 different biomarker assays throughout the course of ID liver, and by merit of having, I think it's 1,300 patients now or thereabouts, we've managed to gather together over 7,500 data points through ELISA assaying of patient serum. You can see you have some serum biomarkers that decrease with cirrhosis and some biomarkers that increase with cirrhosis. And as Karen was alluding to, we're hoping that this data can be integrated together with the risk modelling that's been shown before. What's really interesting now is we're starting to see some patients coming through that have already come through before, so we'll be able to track the progression of risk with follow-on sampling. And we'll also be able to correlate this to patient outcomes outside of fibrosis. So, for example, it could be that some of these markers aren't very good at predicting fibrosis, but they may be able to predict things like cancer. And yeah, and that's it.
Thanks, Elliot. That was great. We're running over a bit over time, so I'm going to go straight to introduce Jenny Irvine and our public advisors for the ID Liver project. If you can come to the front, please. Thank you.
Great. So hi everybody. Yeah, I'm Jenny. I'm an associate with Jokl Manchester. Jokl brings people and health research together for everyone's benefit. So Jokl partnered with the ID Liver team in 2020, and it started as a single research project, and it's grown to a programme of liver disease research since then. We're going to talk to you a bit about the umbrella model that we've set up. It's a really unique way of working, and it allows us to bring public involvement together across different projects. I'm going to do a joint presentation with governance advisors today. So these are members of the public who have an active role in the management of the research projects. Some of the benefits that we've seen of working in this umbrella model way is that it provides peer learning and support for people involved within health research. It allows us to build longer term relationships with communities, and it also, really importantly, allows us to draw the public priorities that we see within one project past the end of that particular research project and that funding stream. So that's really a really big positive point for us. So I'm going to hand over now to Ruth, who's going to talk a bit about our model and also the Jokl Liver network that we've set up, so working with over 100 people.
Thank you, Jenny. This photograph shows members of the Patient and Public Involvement Forum, including governance advisors. We come from different backgrounds and have a wide range of experience. There are 2 governance advisors for each project, and we are members of the project team. We attend PPI forum meetings alongside members of the clinical research team. We were recruited because of our relevant experience related to each project. For example, being at increased risk of liver disease or using liver services. Our lived experience means we have a good idea of what will be acceptable to research study participants. We have a role description with an agreed area of focus, often around communication. We can add value from the patient perspective, helping to influence the way that healthcare is delivered. We might be involved in questionnaire design, sharing our experience of healthcare and making suggestions for improvements. Our contributions can help inform and shape service design and delivery. We recognise that as individuals we cannot fully represent a group or community, so Jokl also have a liver network. This includes over 100 members of the public and community organisations. These people are invited to have a say through surveys and discussion groups. My colleague Catherine will give some examples later. I would just like to add that as a governance advisor, I'm hugely impressed with the dedication of the clinicians and scientists and their willingness to involve patients and the public in this way. The whole experience, and in particular today's conference, has given me real insights into the complexities of medical research. Thank you.
Thanks, Ruth. I'm going to hand over to Gary now. He's going to just talk a bit about his experience of working within the project.
Thanks, Jenny. Morning, everyone. I'm Gary. I'm 11 months post-liver transplant actually today, so I can't tell you how happy I am to see everyone sitting here. I'd just like to talk briefly about how I got involved and what we've done since the project started. Prior to my transplant, I was invited to a pre-discussion group at the infirmary on the service that we're receiving from the liver team. And then post-transplant, I received a call out from Jokl looking for people who had experience of liver disease and or cancer to become public governance advisors. This came with a stipulated role profile, which I felt I strongly matched: relevant health conditions, experience of liver-related treatments, and a lifestyle history supporting this. And then post-transplant, I'm probably stemming from the feeling of glad to be alive syndrome, which I shared with many of the other post-transplantees, people wanting to give back and get involved. I joined the project. Since joining the project, obviously we received training on what our position was within the team, what to expect and what is expected of us, and what really they were looking for us to offer help with. Sort of things around recruiting new participants, best ways to communicate and work with differing groups, and health inequalities and differing experiences of access to healthcare services. We attend the PPI forums, and we attend the monthly work package meetings where we keep abreast of what the rest of the project are doing and sort of keep them updated as to what we're doing ourselves as governance advisors. And in summary, sort of the specific contributions that we've been involved with is we've been involved in a scoping paper on HCC inequalities, and also we've had input into an interview transcript which looks to get the best, the maximum best quality findings, resulting in the best design of questions. In summary, I think it's been mutually beneficial to ourselves as governance advisors, but also to the project and to the project team. And I certainly feel sort of an enhanced commitment to the success of this project moving forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Gary. So I'm going to hand over to Gertrude now, who's going to just share with us some thoughts of working with communities.
Thank you, Jenny, and thank you, everybody else. I have a very loud voice, so I'll try to keep myself and run it down. So I'm Gertrude. I work for the Caribbean African Health Network, and as a public governance advisor, has been a lot of learning. On learning in different aspects, but learning as an individual. I have been diabetic. I have never had a discussion, even with the GP or even a nurse, about the liver. So I make it my business. Business because knowledge is power. And for me, I want to echo Neil's work, what he said early on. We need to detect people early. We need to go beyond the traditional clinical settings. I don't want you to utilize the Caribbean Carnival, where you have over 100,000 people going there. Take those things really. Take those measurements in terms of detection early. Go to mosques. Go beyond where we can really get people. And I take it every time I'm in Uber, I talk about liver. And yesterday somebody told me, actually, sorry, Jenny, because I'm taking a little bit of time. This gentleman told me that actually my wife's going to have an operation tomorrow. I said, how come? She has waited for almost 1 year. The GP cannot even get something going on. Why don't we take these services where people are? So I'm using all the networks through Reach Search Network and engaging the community. That is what we call not outreach, but let's reach the community. Thank you so much. Let's do more.
Thanks, Gertrude. So, so we've naturally developed the approach that we've used to develop our vocal liver network in response to the need of each project. So for the ID Liver project, we were looking at diagnosing liver disease earlier. Who are the communities that have an increased risk? So obviously diabetes, obesity, alcohol, these were all factors that we considered, but also there are certain groups and communities who might be more likely to be affected by one or more of the risk factors, and also geographical areas. So all of that kind of helped us think about who we were going to work with and how we were going to work with them. Sorry, Lucy. We used a broker model, so we worked with trusted members of the community. The person on the right there is Shamim, so I'm just going to point her out now. She couldn't be here today, but she's a governance advisor that was really very actively involved within the work of ID Liver. So the broker model that we used was we worked with a trusted member of a community who had a link to an established group within that community. They also acted as a host when we went along to meet with them. And using that model, we worked with a South Asian women's group based around exercise, a South Asian men's group based around business. We had an alcohol support group, a diabetes and a healthy living group, and also a resource centre in an area of social deprivation. So what did we talk about? So we took along the team, and they led discussions. This was a clinical and research team, would ask the public to get involved in discussions around things like, does it make a difference in our communication, whether or not would it make you more or less likely to attend screening in the way that we kind of phrase our communications? Does it make a difference where you access services within hospitals or community settings? What are those differences for you? So all of this information was collected and fed back to the project teams, and it just really kind of helped them better understand some of the barriers and experiences of the diverse communities within the Northwest region that we're working in. There were actually so many topics that were raised within these community conversations that we decided we needed to go back and learn more. So we met with around 60 people within this first round of conversations, and we went on to develop something called Liver Talks, which Shamim was actually really actively involved in. And I'll just tell you a bit more about that now. So the Liver Talks, what we did is we went back and we asked those same groups of people if they wanted to come and have a second round of conversations with us. We shaped all of the questions around the topics that were raised in those first rounds of conversations. And we left the clinical team behind, and we actually trained Shamim to carry out one-to-one interviews. So it was really more of an informal one-to-one chat with the public this time round. So what did we hear? We heard about there were cultural differences between groups, differences in the ways that people wanted to access healthcare. We heard around a lot about stigma, especially that people were assuming that it was alcohol related, and also that there was a really low awareness of what it is that can increase our risk of developing liver disease. That was a very big one. I think another theme that we found across all of the groups was really surprise. So people were telling us that they had diabetes for 10 years, they see their healthcare professional regularly, but they didn't know that they were at an increased risk. They were really quite shocked, and that this was something we heard time and time again. So we felt it was really important to build on these public priorities, and it actually led us to co-develop an animation and a discussion guide. And the aim of this was really just to target it at people that could make a difference in the way that we have these conversations, healthcare professionals themselves. I'll go on to talk a bit more about that, but I'm just going to ask Catherine if she wouldn't mind just sharing some of the quotes that we picked up from the Liver Talks as well.
Okay, thank you, Jenny. My name is Catherine Lennon, and I'm also a governance advisor. So for me, I had a complete shock when I found I had a liver injury. Although it was a rare reaction that made me a liver patient, I was unaware of the really common things that could cause liver damage. That's something we heard a lot in the community conversations. Please let me read out one example. I was quite shocked from the first time I met you, realising that it's not widely known about the different things that put people at risk. People are not aware of this. I know someone who is obese and probably on the verge of diabetes, though her mum won't know about her liver. I think the public want to know. It's made me want to talk more about it. Okay, I think that was quite an important example. So once people realised what could increase their risk, we heard disbelief, frustration that no one had shared this with them before. Another quote, because they know my history, they should tell us how changes in our body can affect us. We care about ourselves, we have to look after our body, and need to reduce risk of this disease early is better than later. So when we asked people what they'd like to hear, people told us their preferences in how they'd like to have these conversations about their risk, and this is one example. I'd rather know something about me and be able to prevent it, rather than bury my head in the sand. I had a check for cancer, for example, as I knew that was in the family. If I got a chance for a liver disease check now, I'd prefer that. The earlier you're aware, the earlier you can catch it. And the last point from me is that we recognise information needs to be tailored to people's culture and preferences. For example, we had suggestions like, I want to see healthcare practitioners within my local area. I'd like more information about healthy eating in Pakistani cuisine. Some people will need translation or conversations, not written information. I need detailed advice about how to be healthy. Can you help me? And those are the types of quotes we heard time and time again. Thank you. Back to Jenny.
Thanks, Catherine. So we're going to show the animation in a second, but I just wanted to quickly touch on the broader context. So we spoke to clinicians and we asked them, what do you find challenging in having conversations, particularly around risk? And 75% of them said that they'd really welcome some support in having conversations, particularly around obesity. We spoke to the British Liver Trust and we asked them, and we shared what we'd been doing. They thought that what we were doing really reflected the broader kind of challenges that they were experiencing, and it also really closely linked to their stigma survey, a really important piece of work that they've done recently. They were talking to us about also the lack of tools to raise conversations around these things, and we were really pleased when the British Liver Trust came on board to help us co-develop the animation and discussion guide as well, which is what we did. So basically, with the public telling us that they didn't know about the risk factors, they wanted to know more, this broader context, we felt that it was really, everybody was saying we could have better conversations about what increases our risk of developing liver disease. So I'm just going to, bear with me. Oh no, I'm not. I'm on the wrong side, sorry. I'll show you the animation in a second. So we co-produced the resource. We worked in collaboration with the public, the Vocal Liver Network, the creative practitioner, the clinical and research team members as well. The interviews were carried out by Shamim as well, our governance advisor, and people used a storytelling approach. So it wasn't people telling someone else what to do, but they were just reflecting on their own experiences and their own preferences. There's also a resource pack so that teams can take that back and within their local area of work reflect on their own practice with their teams and how they have conversations about liver disease risk. So we jointly launched the animation in January this year as a part of the British Liver Trust Love Your Liver campaign. So yeah, it was something we're really proud of and we're really pleased to be involved in. Hopefully the slide will be on the next screen. So I'll just show you the animation.
My name is Steph. When I found out about my increased risk, it was really scary. I've only associated liver disease with alcohol. So to find out that weight gain and obesity put me in a high risk category, I was very scared.
My name is Roxana. My health professional spoke to me about it when I was hospitalised for something different. So they took a couple of tests and they came back with saying I had fatty liver disease, and that was the first time I knew about it.
My name's Jade. I think it was about 4 or 5 years ago. I was heavily drinking
there's been nothing since, no bloods, no anything. It's kind of like, you've been told, off you go.
It's important for me to know about my disease risk because I have a young family and I'd like to see them grow up and I'd like to be healthy.
It's my body, and if there's a way I can reduce that risk, I want to be aware of it.
If I had been told earlier, I know that I would have changed my ways sooner. I wouldn't have waited until I got to a certain BMI, a certain weight.
There should be more information available, there should be more awareness, and not everybody speaks English.
I would prefer a more personal response, very straightforward and blunt. I wouldn't like it to be sugar-coated. I would like to know the risks, and I'd like to be told in quite a serious stern way. It might be uncomfortable to say it to a patient, but that's got to be the better option.
I would take more action if it was personalised. Because that way it's talking about me and what I can do to make changes. I can be straightforward and just say this is your risk and why, and this is what you can do to prevent the risk. It's important because this is my health, so I need to know what I can do to prevent or stabilise whatever I'm going through. Not just for me, for everyone. Everyone should be aware because it is their body and they have a right to know what they can do to make it better or to make that change.
So I'm not going to say anything else. I'm going to actually just hand over to Steve to do the last slide in our presentation. But I just want to say a huge thank you to everyone here for doing the joint presentation. So over to Steve.
Hiya. So my name's Steve. I'm a governance advisor working closely with Gary and Chris on the revised HCC. Before I here to talk about the main thrust of why I'm here, it's really important when everyone's here for me to talk about how I've enjoyed the project so far. From my very first one-to-one I had with Jenny, I felt there was a real warmth and I felt I was going to be part of something really important. And before I had my first meeting at the NowGen Centre, I was really nervous. I must have circled around the building about 4 times. I got lost, went to the wrong car park. Thankfully, I'd left myself plenty of time, but I didn't know anybody. And it's a big thing when you're getting involved in something like this. But as soon as I walked in that room and met all the other people, the other governance advisors, and we were introduced to each other, and you know, what Jenny's invoked as a real team ethic and a real team spirit, and the structure and the professionalism is something that I've never known before. We were given, on the day, our first day at the NowGen Centre, we were given details of all our meetings, the times and the dates of the online meetings and the in-person meetings, right through to the end of the project, to the end of July. Now, to me, that was something that you would never have expected. There have been a few changes, meetings have changed, dates and times have changed, but when they have, we've always been given that information really, you know, in advance so we can make any changes that we need to. But to go back on to, obviously, the main reason why I'm here, just to give you a little bit of context to my own journey. So in January 2020, I was in hospital up at the Royal Lancaster there for 4 weeks. I was diagnosed with alcohol-related cirrhosis of the liver, decompensated liver, ascites, and also hepatic encephalopathy. In those first 4 or 5 days when I was in and out of consciousness, mostly unconscious, Mum was told on several occasions it was unlikely that I would live, but I'm here. That's the main thing, I'm here, and I'm glad. I'm so glad to be here. And one thing that's astounded me from when I came out of hospital, and through this project is how much I didn't know about liver disease. I knew nothing. And learning through this project, I didn't know that my condition, it would heighten my chances of liver cancer. I never realised how it affects certain communities. I never realised the health inequalities. And it's so good to see all of this is being addressed. And obviously it needs to continue to be addressed. And the animation that we've just seen, I have two words for that. Pure gold. Pure gold. And I know that the first time I saw that was in December last year. I'm even going cold now thinking about it, because as I looked at that, the overriding thing in my head was, when I was on my spiral, because that's all I can describe it as my spiral, right? I am fairly certain I would have done something, because that's real people. There were real people talking, and Jade mirrored a lot of what I was going through. It wasn't my mum talking to me, it wasn't my ex-partner, it wasn't my friends, it wasn't my wonderful neighbour that lives opposite me in the corridor that was constantly telling me what I should be doing. That's real people. And I know that video, that 3 minutes, well, I know it will have such a wide-reaching effect on so many people, because I know if I'm thinking like that, there are an awful lot more people will be thinking the same. And my final thing is really what happens next, because obviously our project finishes in July, and it's something I've become, obviously we've still got 4 months to go, but it's something I've become really, really immersed in. And it's going to be a difficult day, obviously, when we all sort of say our goodbyes, but it's something I don't want to leave behind, because I feel that in the time that we've been together, I, along with other people, have had the chance to make a difference to people's lives. And there's not a lot of people can say that, I don't think. Obviously, many people in this room are doing that. But for people like myself, it makes a huge difference. And I obviously want to see it carry on. So, but massive thank you to everybody. Thanks to Louise from the British Liver Trust. I know Vanessa will pass my thanks on. She put me forward for this, and I'm really grateful to the British Liver Trust and to my fellow colleagues. So thank you.
Powerful to hear you all speak together. It's great how you're all working as a team, and I really enjoy meeting with you every month and at the team meetings as well. So I echo your thoughts. I hope we can continue to work together beyond that 4 months. Yeah. We're a bit behind, as you probably realise, but we'll have 10 minutes now for a break, and there's coffee at the back, and then we'll. So if we meet again at 12 for the next session. Thank you all. Yeah. So I'd just like to introduce Varinder Athwal, who's been a key member of the ID Liver project, and also beyond the ID Liver project, and that's what his talk's about now in terms of where do we go from here, basically.
I think it's been a really nice celebration of what we've been up to. I'm going to talk about growing the ID Liver program. So, and I think it's a testament to the program that we've, throughout it really, we've every work package meeting we've had a standing agenda item of horizon scanning of what next, and sustainability and sustainable innovations really been something that we've been focused off right from the beginning. So are we moving on, or are we building on success, to sort of nick the phrase from this session? Well, we are most certainly moving on and building on success, but where do we go, and what's left to do? And I'm not vain enough to think that we've addressed every challenge in liver disease, so we can pack up our bags and sail off. And I'm not even convinced that we've met all the objectives that we set out as part of ID Liver. So I think there's plenty left to do. And the way we've thought about it, what can we do? We've decided, well, what are we good at? What have we built? What infrastructure do we have to address the next challenges? And to do that, I'm going to go back and talk about what we've been doing. And a lot of our work's obviously been around the diagnostic pathway for steatotic liver disease. I'm not going to try to repeat all the great talks that have already come beforehand. So I'm going to be a bit like Gabriel and try to reduce it down to a series of small boxes. And diagnostic pathway for liver disease looks a bit like this. You have a cohort at the top at which you find the at-risks, and then you try to sort of whittle them down to these 3 filters really to sort of get down to people with the highest risk of disease who then will need more intense management. For many in primary care, this pathway looks a bit like this. There's only GP practice becomes your cohort, persistent abnormal liver tests, and then you're referred to either a gastroenterology or a hepatology service, and they do with you what they will and send back those that they're not interested in. In some places, such as Manchester, you might have a sieve in the middle where you assess for high risk of liver disease, and both Gabriel and Huw have mentioned the test that gets used most widely, which is FIB4. Now, we have tried to address those 3 middle boxes really, and we've aimed to sort of improve the sieving process, as it were. And what have we done? Well, we've talked about what we've done. We've moved assessments to patients' localities to improve accessibility, which should improve adherence and should make this something that people are more likely to come to, as we heard so succinctly from our PPIE groups. We've tried to make the solutions as cheap as possible, but also as something that can be used beyond our borders. So things like Navify, a universal platform, and automation, which should allow us to grow beyond our borders in the future. Taking a step back, we heard Huw and Karen and Elliot talk about the different strategies that we're trying to do to improve the number of people that are identified at high risk. So making sure we're getting the right people in a most cost-effective manner as possible. So using the machine learning triage models and the novel biomarkers, which will over time start to feed into those ML models. And something that we haven't talked a lot about is how we've actually gone and tried to look for disease in large data sets and cohorts. And so proactive risk factor-based identification of people with liver disease. So we start that sieve very wide as early as possible. But the problem, and the problem with all of this is that it's all predicated on the cohort. And that's something I think that we haven't really addressed going forward. Our cohort, by and large, will be GP practices, and that has its inherent problems. Because how do we target them? Well, at the moment we use either risk factor-based identification or serendipity, just pure luck that they get picked up because they have a blood test for something not related to liver disease and they're found to have abnormal liver tests. So who we target, where we target is of critical importance, and this needs improvement. And to just exemplify this, there's large groups that don't get picked up in the methodology that we're using. There is people who are, or I call non-traditional healthcare users, who may not have a GP practice, whose only access point to healthcare is accident and emergency, and they may have significant risk factors and significant risk of liver disease, but we're not picking them up. How do we reach out to these groups? And then there's the low healthcare users. I've not seen my GP in 10 years. I drink a bottle and a half of wine a night. I'm overweight. I'm pre-diabetic. I don't know about any of these things. My risk is exceptionally high, but I've never been to my GP in a decade. Those things are not coded, and how are we going to identify that group? I talked about our borders. This project has been very much a Manchester-focused project, and that has brought with it some of the infrastructure that is very Manchester-centric and allows us the opportunity to deliver this research. But really, if this is going to be something that's an innovation that can go beyond this, then we need to see that it works, and we need to prove that it can work. And finally, it's by no means job done with addressing health inequalities. This is a significant issue. This is a significant issue in Manchester, in Greater Manchester, in diverse populations, and this is something that needs a lot of input still to get it better. I think we've made inroads, but there's plenty more to do. And finally, you saw on my little schematic, I had the little orange management box. Well, can we actually improve outcomes in more advanced disease? Can we use the tricks and the skills that we've learned in ID liver to look to see early detection of other bits of liver disease further down the pathway? And what we've been looking at is early detection of liver cancer as one of our projects. So where have we gone with all this? Well, projects that are now grown out of ID Liver are our Northwest Research Partnership to detect early liver disease. So this is a research-focused partnership building a consortia to expand ID Liver infrastructure to beyond our region. And why is that necessary? Well, on the right-hand graph, you can see liver disease mortality. You've seen graphs, heat maps like this several times already now. But you can see that the Northwest, Lancashire, Greater Manchester, very high, so darker colours, more liver disease mortality. Lots of death from liver disease. But if you look at the research activity, and you can't even see some of the boxes, the only area with significant research activity is actually Manchester. And as soon as you step outside, actually research activity dwindles. We need to get research where the disease is, and that's the key part of this partnership. I'm not going to talk a lot about the Advanced Diagnostics Accelerator. I know Ben will be speaking about it next, but this is really pushing on to address the health inequalities. And also, I think critically for us, it brings together several well-established projects in lots of other chronic disease statuses, and so really will allow us as a group to share knowledge and address multimorbidity, which may well be the real disease that we need to be concerning ourselves with. And finally, I mentioned already Revise HCC. I know it's been mentioned by our governance advisors as well. Revise HCC plans to do the same as we've done with ID Liver for the surveillance of liver cancer. And why do we need to do this? Well, in its current guise, we only pick up treatable liver cancer in 50 to 60% of individuals. We're hoping with our innovations and our addressing the pathway that we can get this closer to 90%. So just to bring it together, nice and quick, we're not moving on. We're trying to grow out. And I think ID Liver has been a springboard for us. It genuinely has, to allow us to develop the clinical research infrastructure, the innovation infrastructure that will, has allowed us to build these projects that I've already talked to you about. It's critical that many of these projects have the same partnerships and collaborations that we've built as ID Liver, and they've been used to then get this funding to address another aspect of liver disease. So I've already talked to you about the already funded projects, but actually there's plenty of other plans. So we've got plenty of further proposals in the pipeline, and we really want to go from bench to bedside, but also from discovery to actually routine standard of care, because that's where I think the real problem is, that we can do lots of fun stuff in labs and in small projects, but actually changing something that remains changed is of critical importance. So that is literally it. So thank you very much.
Quick enough? Yeah, that's very quick. Thank you. That leads on nicely to Ben Bridgewater, who's talking about the Advanced Diagnostics Accelerator and our involvement as part of that project. Thanks, Ben.
Thank you. So I'm delighted to be here. I'm Ben Bridgewater. I'm the Chief Executive of Health Innovation Manchester, which is what we call our Integrated Academic Health Science Innovation System, which is a partnership across the NHS, the universities in Greater Manchester, the healthcare in all its manifestations, and the wider public sector aspects, particularly of local authorities and the economic and public health statutory responsibilities they have, and also the Greater Manchester Combined Authority and the responsibilities that they have. And this isn't me just saying stuff. This is because it's really important to where the Advanced Diagnostics Accelerator came from. what I would say is there's lots of talk about what people in this part of the world call the triple helix, and the triple helix of NHS, industry and academia, and it often feels like kind of words. What I think has happened in this particular program of work that you've been doing is actually it's come together, as shown on the last slide, and I congratulate you for what you've achieved in that, because making change is difficult, making advances is difficult, and doing it on your own is almost impossible. But proper collaborations across those sectors is absolutely essential. I think you've really led the way in how that happens. And quite frankly, I've taken a lot of learning from what you've done in there, which is how we started to bake things into the Advanced Diagnostics Accelerator, which I'll describe in a bit more detail. The final thing that I want to say as a sort of prelude to this is that lots of people think that health and care devolution in Greater Manchester was a healthcare thing, and it wasn't. It was an economic thing. So basically, George Osborne and Sir Howard Bernstein got on like a house on fire and had a real clear vision that actually if you wanted to make a difference, you had to drive economic productivity, and the big thing holding up economic productivity in Greater Manchester City region was the health of the underlying people. And so for the desire to actually drive economic productivity led to the powers that were delegated to Greater Manchester from the centre to try and do health differently, but it's an economic argument, and that plays into some of the things I'm going to say. So I have to say that I do not spend most of my life lying in bed reading government white papers, but I do commend the Levelling Up white paper to you. I think it's a really interesting read, because I think it's a very thoughtful document which gets to the bottom of why there are big inequalities across places in the UK, in England in particular, and more widely. And it talks about the concept that places which are really strong have a series of capitals, and they talk about human capital. They talk about institutional capital, financial capital, intangible capital, social capital, all of these things. And they're saying that to try and level up in the UK and levelling up in England requires a concerted effort to drive all those capitals up, each in their own right, and to connect those things better to the benefit of local places. And that's in essence what is written into the white paper. But as I say, I think it's a good document which I go back and read not infrequently. Levelling Up seems to have kind of dropped down the political agenda a little bit. Used to hear it every time anybody important opened their mouth. We don't really hear that anymore. But I think at the heart, everybody realises that's important. And one of the reasons for that is the economic argument. So the economy of the UK will only be as strong as the combined economies of all the bits of it all. And so actually driving that at place level is important. It will be important into the next government, whoever is in the administration. And that's just the backdrop, I think, to this particular thing that we've tried to do. So written into the Levelling Up white paper was this concept of trying to drive innovation at place level. And they did an analysis, which I wasn't party to the detail of, which was basically saying what are places which have great underlying academic excellence and a requirement to level up, and how can we then start to turbocharge those places with a relatively modest amount of funding. And that amount of funding in the Levelling Up white paper was 100 million. So that 100 million has been spent pro rata, sort of divided into three, if you like, across the West Midlands, Glasgow and Greater Manchester. And that money has actually come through Innovate UK, and we've been delighted to be involved in the thinking to actually put a programme together. And we've learned a lot just by doing the thinking, a lot of which was informed by the IDLUR type programme. And then to take that forward. And these things are now active. It's not a particularly long time, the funding. It's a 2-year funding window, but we've tried to set things up so that 2-year funding window raises further opportunities into the future. And so we've heard that one project comes to an end and we build on the shoulders of that, and then another project happens and we build on the shoulders of that, and that's the methodology that we're trying to bake into this. So there was an open application into this. There were some priority areas defined for Greater Manchester. One of those was health and life sciences. So these are the various different projects which have been funded up under this particular programme, one of which is the Advanced Diagnostics Accelerator. I think Daniel Zamora is in the room, who many of you know. I think he's done a great job picking this up. This was an idea which was formed from a whole bunch of different people. Focusing on advanced diagnostics was building on recognised strengths in the academic world. And actually, we've heard a little bit about this morning. You can only get better outcomes for local people if you get better diagnostics for local people, particularly addressing some of the people who don't normally access services in that kind of way, where, again, we all know that's important. Let's try to build this in a series of use cases with some connectivity across those use cases. So this kind of just gives you some idea of what's involved here. There's two bits to the Advanced Diagnostics Accelerator, one which is very much genomics based, and the other is the other bit, which the Ideal Liver program is folding into, and there's just some of the numbers around that, which describes it. But again, this is building on academic excellence with industry partnerships, playing into needs of local people, in true partnership, and just some sort of target cohorts on the right there. I won't get into the detail of that because I think you've heard a lot about that already. Because this is fundamentally starting with the economy, there is a balance to the partners here where there's academic excellence which is local, there's industry partners which are local, there's industry partners which are national, and then there's some wider partners, particularly some of the global pharma type partners in there. And bringing those together in a consortium we see is really, really important, both in terms of delivering the project and delivering benefits to local people and the economic imperative that I've described here. So that's just kind of summarised on that slide a little bit. So there are a bunch of projects within this. And these weren't kind of chosen at random. These were all things where these are big problems for our local communities. And they're all things where we've got academic excellence which underpins them. So the liver disease you know about, but we have excellent people addressing heart failure, particularly with advanced imaging for early diagnosis of heart failure, where there's new therapies coming off the top to modify the disease process. Lung cancer screening, which people know well about. We know the lung cancer screening program is effective, but we also know the people who access the lung cancer screening program are the people who least need to access the lung cancer screening program, and I think you've heard this before. So addressing that in a structured way is key. Get a better diagnosis at an early stage for chest pain is another project in this. And a whole bunch of stuff about community diagnostics. So you take the diagnostics to the people rather than expect the people to come to stretched healthcare services is another project in there, and the genomics. But I just want to call out some of the enablers, and again, this is learning from a lot of the stuff that's been done in iDeliver and some of the challenges actually that you faced in terms of taking that project forward. So the public engagement, co-production engagement, common infrastructure, a common data platform, which is hard to pull off both from the IG perspective and the technical perspective, and actually shared learning across these projects and dissemination across these projects, so everybody learns together, learns from the best, has a place to actually have those conversations, is a key bit of what we're trying to do. So we are a year into this now, and it was hard to do this from a standing start. We didn't have much run-in period to the whole thing, but we believe we're making reasonable progress on that. We're delighted for the relationship that we got with Innovate UK around this stuff, which again feels like a partnership. This isn't the usual way you do things. Our ecosystem will be stronger at the end of these 2 years than was at the beginning, but actually with a short running period and lots of complexity in a big project like this with lots of partners, it's been a bit slow getting everything in place to kind of kick on, but we think we've got that, and I just described this here a little bit on this slide, but I won't go through it in detail, but happy to take any questions on the whole thing. So that's just an update on why this happened, what we're trying to do with this particular program, and where this plays into the future of the iDeliver program, not just on its own, but in parallel with these other things, all of which have got very similar kind of challenges they're trying to address in slightly different ways. I've got to dash off now, apologies, because I've got something else I need to go to, but I'm very happy to take any questions if there are any questions around that at this particular point.
Thanks. Does anybody have any questions in the audience?
I hate people who come and give a talk and then disappear off. But I am that person today, I apologize. Okay,
Thanks for coming.
thank you.
Cheers. Our next speaker is Paul Wright, who's a GP and working very closely with us, and I guess you can call you an ambassador for some of the stuff that we're doing around the redesigning liver disease care pathways. But I'll let you do your thing.
Thanks, Alan. I feel like I pushed you off the stage there. How are we doing for time?
You can go a bit over, it's fine.
Excellent. So yeah, my name's Paul Wright. I'm a GP in South Manchester, and I feel a little bit like an imposter here today because I've not been on this journey with ID Liver through the duration of the project, and I've sat through this morning and learnt a great deal about all the work that's gone on, the fantastic work that's taken place already. And as Oliver said just recently, you know, Oliver and the team approached me and said, can we be looking to see towards the future and the what next? Stephanie shared with me the videos that have been done by Jokl, and I have to say, you know, they are moving and really sort of affected a shift in my perspective in relation to liver disease. I think there's an asset there, and I sort of wanted to call that out because watching it again, it makes you feel emotional watching that, and it really brings home the reality of why this matters. So I think there's a commitment I'd like to make around that video and see if we can affect that. Now, and I've said that, you know, I'm a GP in Northern Group Practice. I also do some other stuff. So, you know, in terms of the different roles that I've had, these are my professional roles that I've held, and the ones in bold are the things that I'm currently doing. But a lot of the stuff that sort of precedes that and the work that I've done has helped me understand sort of the importance of community engagement. The neighbourhood work I did with my neighbourhood team really helps me to understand, you know, the need around effective engagement and effective sort of co-design, co-production. And some of the work around cardiovascular disease and health checks, I think I'm trying to overcome imposter syndrome, but this is, I sat down and thought, you know, that I've got a dream that I'm going to write down some of the work that I've been proud to be involved in, and sort of those things, our practice delivers community health checks, which is a result of the health check campaign. And I'm aware I'm not talking about liver, but I think, you know, hopefully you'll see why these things overlap and they're all related. And how we effectively turn the wheel around the data that we hold and turn it into meaningful outcomes is effectively the crux of this. So I'm going to take you on a little bit of a personal journey that has resulted in my ability to be involved in this work. Hopefully that will enable you to be involved in that work, and we'll be sharing that because the sort of special recipe I'm about to share has been, some of these slides are 12 years old. I was speaking to Nigel, who I have known for a long time, and we've been driving the same thing for quite a while. So this isn't my big head, by the way. So the analogy I want to draw here is this is about the opportunity, the culture, you know, all of the work that's gone into getting all of this to where it is now is that opportunity. It's the combination of innovation, technology, culture, enthusiasm, engagement has actually taken this project to a place where it's not coming to an end, it's carrying on. And I was surprised to hear that, oh, it's coming to an end. I'm thinking, no, this is sort of where we're going next. So it's about the opportunity. I don't know, does anybody know Dr. Henk Stickelbout? Unsung GP from Shotton. Came back from retirement to support the COVID campaign and absolutely changed my path as a clinician because I worked for him as a maternity locum most probably about 20 years ago. And I was there for a few months and he said to me, he said, Paul, you're doing a great job. You know, you're getting on with people, you're getting on with the staff, it's all going quite well. But I need to speak to you about your coding. It seems like you like having a chat. You know, so that's my analogy. Not only have I been told that, you know, I might share some semblances to Chatty Man. I should put my... There we go. But he explained to me the importance of clinical coding and his filing system and his organisation around the clinical record and what that means in terms of effective care. And the problem here is how do we find the missing information? How do we make sure that we've got the information that we need to drive care? And so this is me every morning coming to work looking for either glasses, wallet, smart card, something like that I don't have. And the coding that we hold within the clinical system is the currency by which we can actually transact effective care. So for all the other stuff that we have to do, this is kind of pivotal to be able to drive somebody's care journey effectively. And that's underpinned loads of the work that I've done. So these are out of date. You can see you've got read codes there instead of SNOMED CT, but is it ischemic heart disease or atrial fibrillation or heart failure or liver disease? It really doesn't matter. The fact is that we're making fairly binary decisions along a care journey, and we need to have that information to make sure that we know where we are, which stop are we at in terms of this journey, what information should I be giving to that person to help them know where to go next. And how we use that in practice, and what we did with Oliver, Stephanie said, right, these are the risk factors, we need to identify a population, and these are the slides from 12 years ago, so you can see this currency is still relevant. You start with the opportunity and the collective thinking, the understanding about the condition pathway and the clinical codes that then helps you to describe who that target population are, and then use that to drive the reports or the data that then steers the ship, and that helps you identify the people that you want to engage with. There needs to be some sort of interaction to make sure those people are aware of the conversation that you want to help happen, and that drives a contact, which in turn then feeds data back into the system, so you have this loop. So that's effectively what we did. And so very quickly, we didn't start the stopwatch. I said it was going to take ages. I think it took about 10 or 15 minutes, if I was being honest. But we very quickly identified approximately 300 people out of a population of 8,000 who are at risk of liver disease, where we could start thinking about the what next. And that's what we're doing. We're inviting those people into the practice to be seen and to take their care journey forward. And this is a proven model. So this is what we did with with health checks when that program first kicked off, and we very quickly were able to affect those conversations and transactions and have conversations with people about the risk factors which needed to be modified to reduce the risk of cardiovascular disease. And that's really the question I asked Gabriel, is that, to me, the overlap and the overlay here with things that are already happening and the people that we want to support and target around liver disease. I think there seems to be a real natural synergy there. And this is a different piece of work relating to ischemic heart disease. And I really just wanted to point something out in terms of what's happening in our system at the moment, because my challenge was to talk about transforming the care journey, and a lot of what you said, I sort of feel like we can do this already, so what do we need to do differently? How can we improve? How do we take it forward? And that was around the missing data, the data leak that we have within the system. So as we interact with one another, how do we make sure that information is exchanged effectively, and we get the greatest efficiency by making sure we do things really well. And an example of how we did this recently, this was looking at the tracking. So I jump around a bit in terms of different clinical subjects. This is the tracking of the recording of anticoagulation in general practice. And it tells a story about effective communication of information. And you can see the yellow line there is Manchester, and this is the recording in general practice of INR. And the grey line that's slightly hidden in the bottom is the Trafford data. And what happened is when EPIC went live, so when Hive went live at MFT, actually the communication of those letters stopped. And we worked with Alexander Irvine and other members of the IT department at MFT, and we put back in place a process where we sent that information electronically, and we sent the coded information directly into the GP's clinical record. And the result was 100% improvement in data quality, which is both good but scary, because what that tells us is for a condition as important as anticoagulation, GPs aren't recording half of the information that they're getting sent. So we think about the care journey around people with important conditions and our interaction around ID liver and how we interact effectively, and the importance of making sure that it's robust. So the good news is, care journeys can be effectively described in terms of clinical coding. And we've got the tools. I mean, the conversation so far has been around all the tools we've got to help drive this journey forward, and that's exactly what we'll be doing. But the challenge we need to meet is that we're not particularly good at doing that, in terms of making sure people are being moved along that journey effectively. And the feedback from, the Jokl and the videos that we heard there really sort of brought that home. And we need, the levers aren't really there at the moment to drive this change in general practice. So we need to be thinking forward about how we make this work move forward. So then I took a step back, and this really links with the, I put these slides together not knowing what everyone was going to be saying, but this really sort of resonates with the conversation that we've had so far. There's a sort of stuff that's known, the things that you know, the things that the clinician knows, and the data that's held within the system. And then there's the things that are happening, the stuff that you're doing, the stuff that clinicians or people that support you are doing, and the most important things to do. And I tried to represent this in something of a Venn diagram, and those are actually, supposed to represent the planets. They're not, you think about the dynamic between what is known and what is happening. There's so much more that's known about you than actually, that is understood. And in terms of the things that you should be doing, I know, in terms of my general health, that if I knew more about the ideal things that I could be doing, it would affect a shift. But we know that, that understanding is not what people have. People don't have the clear understanding about the most important things they could be doing in terms of their health. And the power sits in the wrong place. So if people are thinking about actually, what should I do with my health, all that information is held in the hospital record, in the GP record, and things are changing. So we're seeing, access to records and things being surfaced with patient-held apps and things like that. But I think there's a real opportunity as we shift forward to be thinking about things differently. And that's, I think our opportunity in terms of truly transforming the care journey. Yes, we can continue the work, and we can do clinics in the GP setting, and that is transformational. But what would be truly transformational is if actually we look towards citizen empowerment, surfacing that information so people understand the most important things to do, and are supported to do that. And really, that's where I see in terms of the what next. It's how I could envisage the next 5 years of, the ideal liver work could really extend and accelerate into that space. So all the work that we do, I've always focused on, what have we got here and now, the tools that we've got. And I pointed out a couple of things, and I wanted to just sort of end on focusing on some of the key things that we have got. I have to disclose, I do work for the software company now that make this product, but I've been banging on about this for far longer than they ever offered me a job opportunity. So we have in Manchester, in Greater Manchester, an infrastructure that was put in place 10 years ago that can enable the clinical communication of coded information, and we've never harnessed it. And for me, when we think about how we interact with our work, there's a real opportunity about whether it's this or through other platforms, how we look to make sure we interact in such a way that we don't lose critical clinical information because it drives the decisions that we make. And then the other thing is, as Ben was talking to, is about this interaction around the collective information that's held. Now, when I originally did these slides, this was about presenting that information back to the healthcare professional. But I think really we need to be thinking forward now in terms of how that information is surfaced in a way that's more meaningful, that drives the conversations, because the assets that we have, the driver in the system, it drives a different dynamic with your GP if somebody comes through the door and says, I understand I might be at risk of liver disease, can we have a conversation? And we've got the platforms that could actually surface that information and leverage those conversations, and people could access that information in ways that would get us a lot further, a lot faster than if we rely on the existing infrastructures to do that work. So it's a tremendous opportunity. The size of the prize for Greater Manchester, the overlay, I think, in terms of cardiometabolic disease, liver disease, diabetes, ischemic heart disease, is absolutely massive. And in terms of the opportunity and the argument for moving this forward, I think it's tremendous. So I think, we should be a little bit like the spiders in this cartoon. We should be moving forward and capturing that opportunity. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much. We're now about to go into a panel discussion. So any questions, polls on the panel, so that helps. I'll pass to Varinder then, who's going to chair the session. I'll just set it up. And the panel members come to
Do you want me to stop this? Yeah. Can you put the next slide as a debate? Yeah. Great. No, no. So that can rove. That can go for. Okay, so last session, nearly there. So this is going to be our panel discussion, and you guys can do the work really. I'm going to start by just asking everyone on the panel to sort of briefly introduce themselves.
So my name is Huw Purssell from Roche Diagnostics in the UK.
Manish Patel, CEO of JIVA.
Catherine Boylan, Director of Innovation at MFT.
Hi, I'm Jenny Irvine. I'm an associate at Jokl and PPI lead for the ID Liver project.
Hi, I'm Steve. I'm governance advisor on the Revise HCC project.
Paul Wright, Medical Director at One Advanced in a GP and Northern Group Practice.
Thank you, everyone. I'll start by asking all of you, and I know you've all had different interactions with ID Liver. Some of us have been right from sort of the inception, and some have come on more recently. But what do you think has been the sort of the greatest challenge and the greatest sort of output from your point of views from with ID Liver? I know, like as I said, some of you come on quite late, Paul, so that's fine. But yeah, go for it.
So it's greatest challenges and
the greatest outputs.
Great. So for me, I think the greatest challenge has been getting up to speed with all the work that's been done so far, and I think I'm already challenging myself to think about the sustainability of the work. That for me is, recognising. I was saying before, we had one of the most challenging accountants meetings or definitely the most in our practice this week, looking at the financial sustainability of the practice. And the volume of work and how we have to work in practice is like a cottage industry, really, in terms of, or co-op industries. So there's something about how we, recognising the importance of this work, how do we make it happen? And I think that, for me, that's the greatest challenge.
Steve?
Yeah, I mean, obviously my involvement's been with the Revise HCC, but just looking from a patient's point of view, from what I've seen this morning, the work is just, it's incredible, really, and it's really opened my eyes to the work that's being
done. You got another one? Of course, yeah. Is the other one working? That's it, yeah. 50p in the meter, please. Batteries. We've got another.
Yeah, it astounds me the amount of work that's being done, and obviously from my own point of view, I wish it was done earlier, but it's not so. But the amount of lives it's going to save is just, it's incredible. So thank you.
I think for me, probably some of the challenges are the ones that other people feel, so that's just working in the infrastructure of research, the fixed term nature of it really. I think especially when you're building long-term partnerships with the public, it's really quite challenging. But I think some of the things that I think have gone really well are the partnerships, so both the teams adopting and embedding public involvement from the governance through to the partnerships with communities. So I think that the team have really gone for it, so it's been, I think that's a really highlight for me.
I would say the greatest challenge is around complexity. I mean, it involves a lot of different sectors, different actors, lots of different work streams. And I think, linked to that, I think the biggest achievement is the fact that it's delivered despite that, and because of that as well, I think. And I've been involved in it since the beginning, and so to be here today is particularly gratifying.
Actually, I'll add to that. So the greatest challenge, the greatest output, I think, is that the fact that, we started pre-COVID, went through the pandemic. We could have easily just delayed and, not recruited and not done anything for a long time. And actually, the output was really, really great from that. And I just add to the video that we saw before. That's ultimately why everyone was doing it in the first place. That was really powerful, and I think that was probably the greatest output.
Yeah, so it's been a really long journey, this. And it's amazing to actually see everyone together right at the end. So hats off to everyone who's, you know, kind of the effort and the team, but especially Oliver. But the outputs, that video says it. I can't say more than that. Because the first thing I fed back was like, wow. Like, you know, you said it was pure gold. Honestly, it is. It is.
Thank you. You can hold on to that.
Okay.
I'll open it to the floor. I've got a few other questions, but anyone got any questions that they'd like to ask anyone on the panel?
Hi, it's a question for Paul. Hello, it's a question for Paul. Hi, I'm an alcohol specialist nurse at MFT. I was just wondering, you know, when you said that you contacted people in the community about their health risk, I just wondered what the response was and then whether there was any follow-up.
Yeah, so the driver for the community health checks was the NHS Health Check campaign. And the first thing we did was send texts to people, and that had a predictable outcome in that people that were motivated to respond to texts and had a mobile phone responded, which is both good and bad, because we have to recognise the discrimination that sits within that approach. But what it did enable us to do very quickly was demonstrate that there was a sustainable model within that to go further. And so the work that happens now with the community health check team is that what started on a double-decker bus in Harper Hay, we don't have a bus anymore, we still call it the health bus, but people go out into communities, work with local health development coordinators and social prescribing services to recognise those conversations that have to happen in place with people of trust to actually drive the conversations forward. So I think that would be something that would be good to replicate.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, all of you, for your presentation. And again, Paul, you're selling like a hotcake. This is for you now. You talked about, especially for me, like a patient now, if the GP knows a lot about me, but I also want to know what he knows. When we have this interaction, I have only 2 minutes, and he doesn't ever get to know, to share with me what he knows about me and what I can do about what he knows. So how can we better have pathways or any way that we can have these conversations that we know self-care is right now very important. We can save so much. But people knowing what people know about them, they can do something about what people know about them. So what do you advise should be the best way on intervention in the community we can go on to see the change that really matters? Thank you.
There's not a quick answer to that, but I think there's lots of different things that we need to be thinking about. So I mentioned just the first bit about how people that can use that information could just access that information and self-digest it. So does your GP enable you access to your record? That's the first thing, because if you actually could see the letters and the information, that might give you enough to be able to move that forward. There's something about how general practice is changing and the new roles that we have in general practice. So we have social prescribers, health development coordinators, pharmacists, advanced nurse practitioners, healthcare assistants are pivotal to actually our NHS health check work. And they understand a lot relating to the different risk factors and things like that. So I think part of it may be about developing that expertise in the team that can operate and offer more, because GPs are a pretty expensive resource, and actually a lot of the time that I spend on a day-to-day basis, I'm looking for Naresh here. Are you still here, Naresh? No, he's escaped. So my colleague, Dr. Kanamili, was here as well. But I was going to, when I'm at work on a Monday doing the duty doctor work, actually I think 70-80% of what I do is actually just moving things about. This goes here, this goes here, this goes here, this goes here. And, a good bit of process automation and things like that, technology could do a lot in terms of freeing up the time of the clinicians, but it could also do a lot in terms of interpreting your record. So I think there's the here and now is about having access to your record and speaking to those people within the practice that you can access that are able to support you with those conversations. And I think the eye to the future is about what can we do, how can we actually use the evolution around technology to actually transform what's happening, because I think quite often actually, you know, there's a risk that we'll end up in a place where artificial intelligence is almost better than the minimal offer that we have of general practice if you can't even get your foot in the door.
So can I push on that? So Gertrude's right. We know a lot about Gertrude, but we know a lot about lots of people, and we have data on lots and lots of people. So what can sort of SMEs or bigger companies do with that data? What good could you do with access to that data? Not necessarily down to the sort of, you know, our individual names, but, you know, as a broader brush, what could you guys offer with access to data, primary, secondary, linked data like that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I always thought that, you know, medical record, your medical record belongs to you. That in theory, that is the case. But actually accessing your medical record or giving access to someone else to do something with your medical record is really, really difficult. And there's all sorts of blockers rightly in place that, you know, ensure that your data remains safe and that kind of thing. But sometimes it's a little bit of a blocker. The difference between SMEs and, you know, the bigger companies, obviously we can be a bit more agile. I think you'll agree to that. We can be a bit more agile about what we deliver. And the number of times we've had a potential client or a potential partner who needs to access to a record that will really affect the patient positively if we were able to do something with it. You know, the kind of stuff that you were talking about, automating some of the, you know, day-to-day tasks that GPs do, interpreting a record, you know, lifting out, for example, whether you have heart disease or liver disease or whatever it might be, and use that as a signal for something else. The number of times we've been blocked from doing that for all sorts of reasons is a little bit ridiculous. So we need to maintain the security bar that, you know, so that people don't access data kind of willy-nilly, but it also needs to be unblocked, because there has to be a recognition that actually everything is starting to get automated. AI kind of all over the place now, and therefore we need to think of ways of being able to do that.
Yeah, so from a kind of large industrial partner, I think what's really important for us is having access to that data in a compliant way, but making sure that it's well connected and coordinated within the actual system. Like mentioned earlier, there's AI everywhere, and there's good and bad, and we need to kind of cut through that noise. Just like the data, there's well-constructed data and not so well-constructed data. We have to do that work with that. But I think ultimately it does belong to the patient, and partners or companies like Roche, we've got a pharma arm, we've got diagnostics arm, we've realised that digital is the future, but we need to understand that, and the only way we will understand that is working with SMEs, startups, academic partners, and the NHS ultimately, the system. So the Innovate platform, you know, has allowed for that, but we've also got to see it through. So it's the legacy that we leave and what we build off of that.
Anyone? Any other questions?
In terms of the data access,
You have to have a microphone, Karen.
It's just so I was over in Sweden at SciLife Lab, which does lots of different science, but one of the great things they have is access to patient data. And so I wondered, as a global company, can you learn from some of the kind of Scandinavian countries where they do seem to already, it's an accessible database, and is there anything that, you know, we should be learning in the UK from that?
Yeah, absolutely, because we're a global company, so all the different affiliates around the global regions, like we call it. So for example, across Europe, the Nordics, we have teams who work, and they have very different experiences, but the healthcare systems can learn from each other. So the UK has looked at, because of the NHS, you know, for all it is, it's so rich in data, but it's well coordinated in some instances, and obviously in some it's so fractured. So, for example, say the Manchester region, we've had a good experience here as a company and with the partners that we're with, but you can just go down south and it's a little bit more fractured. I think the other bit, what's really important is health inequalities and population health. So that's why we picked the north of England, because of that kind of major difference. I won't say levelling up because that doesn't exist, but it's so important to learn, like you say. So we do learn from other countries. So in Africa, it's amazing, even though they don't have like the legacy of their infrastructure around the healthcare system, the movement of data is so much easier, and by a simple text message, because they're just operating on a text at the minute. We battle to get to that stage.
I can add to that a little bit. It's mental that you can control a vehicle from Earth that is sitting on Mars, but you can't send a medical record across the street. It's really dumb, right? But to be fair to Roche, I mean, you guys sit on the Office of Life Sciences at number 10, and you're actively involved in actually changing that. And Manchester's part of that. You know, the creation of the SDE here to make that connection between primary and secondary care better. So I mean, things are happening. It's just a bit slow. Yeah.
Can I come in on that?
Well, yeah, of course you can.
Yeah, so we recognise the frustrations that industry in particular have with accessing data, patient data, health data, and we're doing a lot at a trust level to overcome some of that. Because as Rav alluded to, it has to be in a certain way, otherwise there's no value to it. And with discussions that we have one-to-one, but also with discussions we're having with organisations such as the ABHI, which represents the sector as a whole. We're really listening to what industry needs and want and trying to work to address that.
Thank you. Any questions? Gertrude? Whilst the mic's getting to Gertrude, I'll ask Jenny and Steve about this idea with innovation and data. I think it brings a lot of anxieties to patients and the public. What can we do to sort of help them sort of allay those fears, so to make them feel like this is not something that's sort of nefarious, but actually is for benefit?
Yeah, should I go first? So data wasn't one of the things that we had sort of broad discussions with the public about, and I think I don't want to make assumptions. I think people are mostly concerned with their health, and I think when you have those discussions, actually access to data, if that's going to improve their health more quickly, then they would probably be keen that there was something done about it. I think what we can do is work in partnership with the public. So by involving them in the governance in the way that we do things, they're involved in all of those decision makings. That's going on. They understand what's going on. It's transparent, and I think it also then can encourage other people who we might not see in research as often to come forward. So I think by working in partnership, we can tackle all of these things together.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think working with patients, I think, is one of the strongest things that can happen, because certainly if you look back to that video and how much that affected me, obviously I can't change what happened to me. I stayed with the cars I was dealt with, but that can help so many people. And I think if you look at the work that we've done it's August really, the impact we've had and the involvement, I still think that patients who've got that lived experience, like in my case, it wasn't my doctor talking to me, the impact that a patient can have is probably a lot far-reaching than some people probably understand, I think, because you're talking to a real person who's been there.
Yeah, fully agree. Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much. Just wanted to put another proposal to all of us in terms of people maybe who might really be at risk. Most of these people don't come to the clinics, and there's a lot of data within charities and NGO support services there. There's large volume of data. So how can you tap in the data that's not clinical to support your work? So that's one area that I'm suggesting to look at into using that set of data to support the work that you really do in your own settings. Thank you.
Non-clinical data, who would like to take that? Whilst you guys, we do use it, Gertrude. So I think we've, right from the beginning of iDeliver, as we were trying to get access to stuff, we worked with the guys in Solace, and we've used publicly available data, ONS data, census data to help us sort of define areas. I still think compared to the gold mine of linked healthcare data, it doesn't have that granularity and doesn't get us beyond. So what I sort of think of fairly obvious things, and they may then carry my prejudice, because I might feel X helps me define areas of liver disease, or deprivation helps, but it does start to get us rolling, and I think it is one part of the puzzle. I don't know if others have an opinion on that as well. Go on, Paul.
I think just to say, in terms of infrastructure, that the Greater Manchester's got a really good infrastructure around clinical data, and then the Greater Manchester Care Record is moving that, shifting it into bringing together the social care data. We should be looking as a system as to how do we create that interface, because if we're going to use the data, we need to be managing it in a structured way that can then be plugged into the analytics and all the rest of it. So I think that's really a development challenge for the system, to say, that there's things like the shift pattern and that sort of stuff. We know sort of information about bin collections and stuff can give you an early indicator around sort of what's happening in someone's home. So I think it's will be an important step, but I think we've still got quite a long way to go with the stuff that we already know. And I think that was the sort of thing, is we know so much and do so little with it at the moment, and so I think that we need to move the dial, don't we, move it forward.
Nigel?
Thanks for that. Gertrude, you make a fantastic point. So I'm Nigel Sloan, I'm CEO of Solace. My colleagues have kindly name-checked me and my company throughout the morning, and thanks to them, it's been a pleasure working with you. But Gertrude's point is a fantastic one, and this comes from a data person who's built a business working with coded data. And we know that when we can get access to that data, which is often a challenge, and don't get me on that, we can talk over lunch maybe, but we know that there's great insight to be had from that clinically coded data, and that's important. And one question to the panel is, on the back of the insight that we can generate off that coded data, how do we use those insights to better tell stories to our communities, to engage them in co-production for solutions moving forward? I think there's an important question there, because we can't do it alone. We have to do it with our communities. And the second point, and I'm sorry, I don't have an answer, but we really need to capture that from Gertrude. And it goes back to Steve and his story. And to pick up on your theme, Steve, if I may, of pure gold, your story is pure gold. And your stories won't be alone. There will be lots of Steves out there with similar stories which we need to capture. We need to understand those stories and recognise that all the answers do not lie in that clinical coded data. It will take us so far, but it needs to be supplemented by the Steve stories and others like Steve, because it's that qualitative data which is the real pure gold. The clinical data will take you so far, but the answers lie in the Steve stories. So my challenge to all of us in this field, if you like, is how do we better capture the Steve stories to better understand how we can better support our communities moving forward, because we have to take our communities with us.
Co-production with, I don't know if anyone's got any ideas or thoughts on that. I'm going to try to gently move us away from data, if I may. Innovation, I think it's a great field to work in, so moving from research to innovation. But I think the biggest step isn't the research to innovation, it's innovation to standard clinical care. Maybe I'll start with you, Catherine. How do we make that leap? How do we go from a really great pathway that I can implement with a really engaged practice like Northern and group practice? It works, it looks good, we can get some, say our data looks amazing, Gabriel tells me it's saving millions. How do we get that from there to something that's used everywhere?
It's a great question. So we do think about the pathway as being like that and very linear, but actually, and I think ID Liver exemplifies this, actually I think you need to be thinking about the clinic from the very earliest stages of planning your research, never mind undertaking it. So I think it's not how to get there, but it's how to make sure you are best positioned to get there. It's thinking about patients and experience and the workforce and how they will be impacted by what you're proposing in the research and, you know, transition to innovation, and thinking about all those things up front. So we and the evidence that you need to get from there to there. We have a lot of conversations with companies who come with a fully formed product, but actually they've not thought about the pathway. They've not thought about, you know, does it work in real life? And actually we have to kind of encourage them to unpick that, to actually think about that retrospectively, which is never great. So I think, long story short, I think about that even from the very beginning. You know, don't leave it to the point where you think something's ready to launch.
Great. Anyone else before we go back to the floor?
So, and we're one of those companies that you mentioned. So, historically, we're so guilty of having a finished product, or we think we've got the answers. And one thing that's key, and we've kind of evolved over the last 10, 15 years, is we need to get the clinicians involved so much earlier to actually give us the insights, because that's what we actually need to feed into actually co-creating and co-developing. So again, you know, it goes back to, we've been within this project for 3.5 years. We've got an extension that Oliver worked on. We've been through a pandemic, but the innovation's really, really driven, you know, kind of the answers. But if I rewind it back to when we were at interview, and Neil were missing a tooth, which I totally forgot about that. It stuck in my mind. Is it okay now? Yeah. Good. I remember trying to get the budget internally within Roche for this project, and basically the benefit in kind, and to get people to buy into it then was a little bit of a battle. But ironically, then as we got into years 2, it got so much of like kind of a spotlight. You know, HCCs off the back of this. So we've managed to build a lot of kind of other projects and opportunities off the back of it. And now global, where it's like our mothership, where we get the budget from, they're kind of turned around and gone, oh, you know, it's so good that you're in this space, and it's put the UK on the map, it's put ID Liver on the map of Manchester. But it's just funny how things change, and you've got to keep at it, especially with the innovation. I don't know if you want to.
No, not really.
Anybody else? Any other questions? Yeah, of course you can, Jenny. Yes, yeah, of course you can. Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
I was just going to say, so I think that public involvement can play a really big part in this, because, you know, those people that we're not seeing on a pathway, you know, what are the barriers? And I think that additional kind of learning and insights within communities of those people that we're not seeing, and what are their preferences and their experience. I think that it's just, that partnership where we can have those conversations with people. I think we really need to be really very inclusive in the way that we work. So all of those groups that we worked with, that we showed you in our presentation, we worked with them differently for each group depending on their preferences. So it's all about conversations, starting the conversations, not making assumptions, and being inclusive in the way that we approach things to kind of make sure we've got a full picture.
Thank you. Any questions? Oh, sorry, I'm getting rubbish at this. Getting ready for lunch, clearly.
I think the challenge to move away from the data just got me thinking about, you know, this is about wider determinants of health, isn't it? And, you know, if we're thinking about how do we make this sustainable, I think we need to be thinking through that lens. I'll naturally fall back to thinking, what can we do in Northern, what can I do with the data? But actually, you know, where else does this impact in society? What is the wider societal gain to getting this right? Because it's massive. And then for Greater Manchester, what are the underlying drivers that are sitting beneath this? Because there's going to be a lot of overlap between the same drivers that sit around our greatest priorities for the city. So I think that is something that would be good to be thinking about as we go forward.
Agree, thank you. Any other questions? I've got one kind of based off that, so I'm sorry to be hogging the microphone, I guess. It's always felt like a one-directional relationships of industry with NHS. You know, like we're the good guy, you're the bad guy. You come to us, and we say, oh yes, no, maybe. I think over time that relationship's become bi-directional, but I still think we don't think about you guys enough. And how can we improve that? How do you? How could Catherine and myself? How can we improve our relationship with you? Because you need the real world data, and we need the technologies, the skill sets that you've got to actually improve patients' outcomes. So how can we help you?
You're good. He's fat. I'm ugly.
You're all right. You're in the middle. Do you want to take it?
Okay, I'll take it. Yeah. So it's a really good question. So I've got a different perspective because we're obviously a much smaller company than Roche, right? So when we go to an NHS trust, like if I was going to go to Lucy or Huw, they'd be like, who are you? Whereas there's a certain amount of credibility that comes with going through a very large industrial partner, and that was one of the major advantages of being on this project for us, was that we got that credibility by couching ourselves inside Roche's Navify system, and therefore having that as a delivery mechanism to what we were doing. We had obviously a big wider plan, which was, well, actually, if we could make this work for ID Liver, we could probably make this work for almost any diagnostic, because essentially there's a generic tool that clinicians use. There is access to data that we don't need to worry about, and we can just build the AI and put ourselves in there. So there is a weird dynamic with the NHS, I think, in that the big boys tend to get a lot of money, and us little guys tend to try to fight for it. But I think it's in that partnership, that trio of working together collaboratively, especially in the grant projects, to deliver something real.
Just to follow on from that. So I've learned over the years working in industry. So I've always been in the private sector and for larger players. But I think if you kind of go back 20 years, we were seen as quite, what do you want? It always comes at a price. How much is it? And then, for example, data, patient data, it's always looked upon, the big companies just want to get their hands on the data. We're not interested in that. What we're interested in is, right, okay, how can we all work together and actually bring the data, get basically the clearance, the compliance from the patient. And when you talk about kind of, there's so many other factors, kind of social factors involved with how people are kind of receive their healthcare, and a big area is like kind of population health now, and it's really being driven around where you live, what kind of house you live in, your diet, everything is taken into account. But we can't do this on our own as the larger player, and like Manish says, we've got more money apparently. It don't feel like it at times, to be honest. We really need to battle for budget, but without the SMEs and the startups, we'd be crippled, because we're like the big tanker. It takes us forever to turn around, and we've realised that we can't do half of what the startups do at the pace that they do it. So if we partner, and it's been demonstrated in ID Liver and many other projects as well that we've worked on, it's the startups and the SMEs who actually give us the insights, but also give us the capabilities to partner up and actually deliver something within a timescale. If we were just involved in this on our own, it'd take forever. So we're not that bad, I hope. But
I don't really think about it.
Yeah.
Catherine, what about from our side of the divide?
Yeah, I mean, I think traditionally we do think about the relationship as being very transactional. So, big companies saying, what can we sell you? And the NHS saying, well, can you give us some money? The NHS and academia, give us some money to do our research. I think ID Liver is a great example of moving away from that model. We're taking that further within the trust and speaking to Roche and some of the other big companies about how actually we proactively try to develop these co-creation relationships, so taking our challenges as an NHS organisation to the company and saying, how can we work together to fix those, rather than traditionally companies saying, well, this is our technology, what can you do with it? So I don't see anybody as being the bad guys. I think we all add something different and something complementary, and it's about acknowledging that and recognising that and using that to deliver mutual benefit.
Thank you. I don't really think they're the bad guy. Any other questions? So I'd like to just stop it there. Thank you to the panel for a lively discussion, and I was going to ask Neil to come and close the session, please.
Thank you. So I've really enjoyed this morning. I think it is tremendous. I go back to what I said at the start, and I think for those of us involved, if it's not the best thing we've been involved in when we're doing our research, it's not far off. I think it has been tremendous. Verinder, you let me down on describing the liver. I was looking forward for you, so I'm gonna give it a go. So I think the bit I hadn't really thought of it like this, but at the start of the project. But the liver is a weird organ in that it just gets on with it, and therefore it gets on with it and accrues damage, but doesn't actually say anything. So if you think about a heart and it gets damaged, you get chest pain. If you think about your lungs and they get damaged, you get breathless, and you notice those things very quickly. But the liver is like the sort of rugged centre back that just kind of carries on. And to further my dreadful analogy, that the heart and the lungs, they're like Italian centre forwards. You don't go anywhere near them, and they're rolling around on the floor as if you've shot them. But there is something true in that about the liver, and I think so many of you, and we've heard such powerful stories today about. Well, I didn't know any of this, and why didn't I know this, and how come? And actually, there is something rooted actually in the biology and the medicine, just in terms of what the organ does. So I think one of our take homes is it's our job to work with partners to try and change that a little bit, because it is as we've heard, across the patch as sort of public health, it's a major problem in the Western world. It really is. So it was remiss of me at the start when I said hello, not to call out our partnership with Nottingham. Lucy, who's here again, has completed her PhD through this work as like Huw as a registrar, coming through the ranks to be the next generation of leaders in hepatology. So it does have its roots in our partnership with Nottingham. Karen, Varinder and myself, we've worked with Neil Gower and the Nottingham team. Neil can't be here today, but he's a consultant hepatologist down there and university professor for 15 years, about. And it has been tremendous. And actually, we were just getting on momentum. If it hadn't been for the Nottingham guys, I doubt we'd have got started. I am really proud of what we've done, not just in terms of research. I think you heard from Karen a little bit of the story, but career-wise and career development-wise, Varinder's here, Catherine sat a few rows back, Hugh's here on the front. These were people coming to us on the clinical side and going off and getting their MRC, clinical training fellowships. Tough interviews down in London, big panels. They got those awards, they got their PhDs, they're now consultants, and Jenny at Stepping Hill, consultant hepatologists that actually have changed the local landscape and how we can deliver hepatology. When Karen and I arrived, I'm going to share a dreadful thing, we were told in no uncertain terms that Manchester does not do the liver because of sort of academic politics over what was viewed as important in the university. And we've changed that. And it's been a team effort, so I'm really chuffed about that. And now my phone's gone off and my notes have disappeared. But no. So I'm gonna. This is an easy job. I've just got a load of thank yous to say. I'm going to thank MFT as the big organisation here, the big healthcare trust, just about the biggest healthcare trust, or the biggest in the country. It's sort of right up there. It gets towards about 3% of the NHS, I think it is, in England. And in particular, I'm going to thank the innovation team. So Mark is sat at the back, who was involved in the innovation team for very many years, and now Catherine is here. I actually think MFT is a real pioneer in this space of thinking about innovation within the NHS setting and wanting to be entrepreneurial and change things and be imaginative and embrace the private sector, embrace commercial world, embrace the academia and work together. And how can we do all this? And so Catherine is right when she said she was there at the start. This actually came off the back of a failed bid actually to Innovate UK prior to that, and you know, Catherine was there for that. She's been right the way through this. So without that input, we wouldn't be here. So very grateful. I'd also like to thank, and just sat behind Catherine actually, Tim and Ian, who are here from Innovate. One of the things you kind of learn over the years is what felt at the start very much poacher gamekeeper when you were applying for funding and trying to get funding for your research. Actually isn't. It's a team. And that the people at the funders really do care. They want stuff to be successful. They want to help. And actually, it's our job to help them because they have to go and present their case within the echelons of government and the whole process of securing departmental funding in government, of what the priorities are against other competing budgets. So it really is a team effort of how we work together. And Tim, Ian, it's been a pleasure over this last programme because we have had your tremendous support. You know, we've had the pandemic, we've had challenges over budget, we've had flexing budget over financial years, we've had no cost extensions. You've been very helpful throughout all of that, so I'm very grateful. I'm also going to say there was mention made this morning about a spin out, and it is also a point of pride that we are going to hopefully set up a spin-out company out of this. I did notice when Karen and Elliot were presenting some of the data that faces dropped because we did that dreadful thing of not actually telling you what the precise factor was. The faces dropped apart from two people in the audience, and that was Evelina and Elliot, who were phenomenally impressed and delighted because they're from our tech transfer office and that we hadn't corrupted all of our IP in the process of this morning. So well navigated over there. I thought that was well done. We don't have a name yet for the company, so we might run a sweepstake at the end of the session just to see what we can come up with. But it really is about harnessing the work of Mani and the JIVA team and what we have, and harnessing the novel biomarker data built off the last 15 years of science to try and get something that is a diagnostic out there to be predictive at early stages of liver disease and to make a difference. We're commonly asked by the Evelina and Elliot about where will this position in the healthcare market, and to be honest I have no idea, and if only because I think, picking up on other comments, healthcare has changed beyond all recognition even in the last few years. You know, the pandemic brought us point of care testing and lateral flow tests, but you see what's advertised now on television, the glucose sensing in diabetes, the direct to consumer, the opportunity, I think, to pick up on the comments from those of us who've helped advise on the project, from the public side, is I think the opportunities of how we do all of this tremendously different now than it was even a few years ago. I'd like to thank, in partnership with that thought, the British Liver Trust. Again, tremendously supportive. The video, we hope that video will go viral. We hope we can use that more broadly. We hope we can actually disseminate that and take full use of it, because it is hard work to put these things together. But thank you to the British Liver Trust, because we have felt supported throughout. And then that brings me obviously and neatly to Jokl and our public contributors. The governance advisors, I'm afraid for me that's got all the allure of the taxman as a title. It's sort of slightly scary. So I'm just going to call you our friends, because I think that's what you are, and I'm very, very grateful for everything that you've done. And I'm near the end now, because actually picking up on that and some of the comments that Steve made and Oliver said at the start, we didn't have a kick-off meeting at the start. Well, we did actually. It's today. because I think there is so much that's going on. We have led to the other funding with Roche on the hepatocellular carcinoma, liver cancer, that's a major advance. We have now got the Northwest network set up to go bigger and bolder. And of course, we are continuing this work through the Advanced Diagnostics Accelerator. So it isn't just carrying on, it's getting bigger. So I very much treat this as the kick-off meeting. So thank you very much for coming on that. Now, I've got one more thing, and by exclusion, you know what it'll be, and that's to thank the person. I'm getting all emotional here. It's to thank the person who's done all the hard work over the time, and it's Oliver. So. So it really wouldn't have happened without Oliver from start to finish. Every now and again you're lucky enough to get people in the team who really do make a difference. And Oliver, that's you. So thank you.